Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good morning, esteemed speakers, honorable guests, scholars, and conference participants. I am Faraz Haider. I'm the conference coordinator for day two and lecturer at the Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies and an alumnus of the Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies, where my research focuses on climate security. It is with great pleasure and honor that I welcome you all to day two of the International Conference on Developing Indigenous South Asian Episteme for International Relations and Strategic Studies. I hope you all are as excited for today as I am. We have an amazing lineup of speakers to whom I'm grateful for having accepted our invitation to speak on this pertinent issue. And I'm delighted to see such a distinguished gathering of minds who are committed to the advancement of knowledge in the audience. Today's theme is the need for cultivating South Asian knowledge frameworks, our own perspectives, our own ways of getting to creating knowledge, as opposed to adopting ones that are or that may be far removed from our cultural realities. My strategic studies students and I were just discussing this week that, for instance, Machiavelli is the prince, or Machiavelli himself, they were products of their time. And as is any concept, any theory, any framework, or any classical text of a discipline. So because of that, they then must be understood in that context before we blindly start applying them for analytical purposes or for practical purposes. This notion is partly what made me ponder during my own research that perhaps the biggest threat to South Asian states is not another South Asian state, but the very environment or the climate we live in and the unfolding impacts. This notion is also, again, partly why I decided in the morning to adopt a more bright and colorful tone for my address as opposed to the blue or gray or dark tones that I tend to wear. On a more serious note, the importance of today's theme is very simple. We have for too long relied on Western-centric perspectives in strategic studies, most likely to the detriment of the region, especially if we consider how security has progressed in the region. And it's because these perspectives, these Western-centric perspectives, tend to overlook the cultural nuances, the geopolitical context, and the unique history that we've had in South Asia. So before we delve into the discussions for day two, it's very important that we do a quick recap of day one, the thing that we can take away from it and the lessons that we can keep in our minds. I'll start with the fact that which we'll discuss on day one, that we've had a rich history in South Asia, from the Mauryan Empire to the various sultanates, then to the Mughal era. And history has showed us that there has been a distinct South Asian statecraft. It's not as if we do not have those historical data sets to rely on. So we must start to at least try and incorporate these data sets. And before doing that, formally build these data sets on which to then build indigenous epistemes. More recently, it has been abundantly clear that the decolonization efforts and the plethora of global wars have shaped the geopolitical landscape that South Asia faces. And because of this, we've been impacted by these global wars to the detriment of our stability and our security. Relatedly, structures of inclusion and exclusion have played a significant role in shaping the global conflicts as well as regional conflicts, which have then created issues for conflict resolution. When certain key actors are removed from the debate of that conflict, the chances of conflict resolution become very small. So in order to then deal with that, we have to carefully examine those structures and find ways for moving towards inclusivity. An important point that came up yesterday was that unlike Europe, where functionalism had the support of mechanisms and circumstances such as the Marshall Plan or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, we in South Asia lack similar conducive factors to proceed in the same way that the European Union did. So the challenge lies in translating the notion of a shared South Asian identity into practical and relevant and useful policy options and actions for peace in the region. The good thing, however, is that a challenge does not mean something that is bad. It's an opportunity where we can tend to then find a solution. So a solution perhaps could be that we take into efforts to create and craft a shared South Asian identity, which is based off of inclusivity, so that it can then be more easily translated into practical steps for the betterment of stability and peace in the region. Very importantly, before we get into day two is that we saw a consensus that the discipline needs to be decolonized and we need a sort of post-Western IR theory. And to do that through, again, an approach of inclusivity. Meaning that the point is not to reject, yes, I said that we rely too much on Western-centric perspectives, but the point is not to reject Western-centric perspectives, but rather to create a space of our own within the field or within that area of the discipline. So the next focal point should or would become that we also discuss the barriers that we face in doing that. One, on a fundamental level, but then more specifically in relation to the other limitations that most, if not all, in the strategic community would be very well aware of. So we have to focus on navigating those barriers if we want to achieve the goals and points that we highlighted yesterday. These few key points, let's say lessons and takeaways from day one, have given us a very strong foundation for our deliberations today. So through our esteemed speakers' presentations and the interactive sessions that will follow, let's start charting or trying to chart a course towards Indigenous episteme, locally made, formulated frameworks and knowledge for strategic studies specifically. I urge everyone to keep open minds as we go through the proceedings. Not everything may be conventional. The whole point is to challenge the existing frameworks. So do keep an open mind and stay with your commitment to intellectual inquiry. Thank you. Let's have a productive day two, and I hand over the proceedings to the MC. Thank you, everyone.
Assalamualaikum everyone, and good morning. I am Rahat Rashid of BSIR 5th semester, and this is my colleague, Rabia Jamil of BSIR 2nd semester. Welcome you all to the second day of our two-day international conference on developing Indigenous South Asian epistemes for international relations and strategic studies. Let's begin with our first session of the day, which is titled Origins of Strategic Studies in South Asia, the Influence of Cold War Discourse. The moderator for this session is Dr. Zahid Mahmood Zahid, an assistant professor at the Department of Strategic Studies, Air University. He holds expertise in political Islam, terrorism, Afghan affairs, the war on terror, foreign policy of great powers, geopolitics of religion, and militant discourses. He had been a research fellow at the University of Maryland, USA. Sir, please take your seat on the stage. Allow us to briefly introduce our panel. Meanwhile, the panelists are requested to proceed and take their seats on the stage. Our first speaker, Dr. Rizwan Zaid, is a professor of international relations and strategic studies and directing staff at the Air College Institute, Karachi. Formerly, he was head of the Department of Social Sciences, Iqra University, Islamabad. He is a former Benjamin Meeker Professor, Institute of Advanced Studies, University of Bristol, UK, and research scholar at Foreign Policy Program, Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C., USA. Dr. Zaid holds a PhD from the University of Western Australia and is the alumnus of Regional Center for Strategic Studies, Colombo, and Daniel K. Inouye, Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, Honolulu, Hawaii. His areas of expertise include international security, nuclear strategy, South Asian security, and terrorism. Dr. Zaid will shed light on the topic, evolution of strategic thought in South Asia. Our second speaker is Dr. Rubina Wasim. Dr. Rubina Wasim is an assistant professor in the Department of Strategic Studies at National University of Science and Technology, NUST. She is a former research fellow of the George Washington University, Washington, D.C. She holds an MPhil and an MSc degree in Defense and Strategic Studies from Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, and a doctorate in Strategic Studies from National Defense University, Islamabad. Her interest areas are nuclear export control regimes, nuclear proliferation issues, and international security. She has more than 10 years of teaching experience in the field, both as adjunct and permanent faculty. Her research has appeared in national and foreign peer-reviewed journals. She will be speaking today on impact of superpower rivalry on South Asian strategic thought. Our third speaker for this session is Dr. Salma Malik. Our third speaker for the session is Dr. Salma Malik. She is an associate professor at Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. She specializes in the areas of conflict and security studies and South Asian affairs. Prior to joining Taiwan University, she worked as a research officer at the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, from June 1996 to August 1999. Her publications include an edited volume, Pakistan's Security Problems and Challenges in the Next Decade, RCS's Policy Studies, titled Small Arms and Security Debate in South Asia, USIP co-authored study on mapping conflict trends in Pakistan, besides articles in research journals, book chapters, and monthly columns. Today, she will enlighten us on alternative regional perspectives on security studies. I now give the floor to our panel moderator for session proceedings.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Rahat and Rabia, for generous introduction. I warmly welcome my panelists on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, today is the second day of our international conference on developing indigenous South Asian epistemes in international relations and strategic studies. Let me remind you, those who did attend yesterday's event and those who could not attend yesterday's event, that yesterday's proceedings revolved around international relations, wherein academics and practitioners navigated at different themes of international relations, like South Asia's pre-modern international relations, indigenous epistemes for IR and South Asia, crafting South Asian framework for international relations. Today is the day of strategic studies. And the panel discussion of the day is on origins of strategic studies in South Asia and the influence of Cold War on IR and strategic studies discourse, especially in strategic studies discourse. During this session, the esteemed panelists will discuss the influence of Cold War I, because we all know we are living in the second Cold War. The previous Cold War that we are talking about, that was between Soviet Union and USA, on the origins and evolution of strategic studies in South Asia and the possibility of alternative perspectives on security studies. This session will assess evolution of strategic thought in South Asia, impact of superpower rivalry on South Asian strategic thought, alternative regional perspective on security studies. For smooth conduct of this session, I would request the audience to turn off their phones on to silent mode. I would suggest the flight mode is a better option. All speakers will have 15 minutes each for their talk. And at the end of the talk, we will have a 45-minute Q&A session and the debate on the issues originated from the responses of the presenters. A soft reminder will be given to the presenters so they timely conclude their talks. With this, I invite our first speaker to take the podium.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Before I say anything else, I must appreciate Faraz for giving a very incisive summary of what happened yesterday. But there is a disclaimer. We strategic study students have no obligation to accept what IR says. So let's see what happens today. Yesterday was yesterday. So I think the first thing that I must say is that I'm extremely grateful for the organizers to invite me here, especially my dear friend, Dr. Adil Sultan. It's like a homecoming for me because most of you, including the students, don't know that I have a very long association with FASS. I was its first external evaluator for its curriculum. I taught contemporary strategy here, and I was also once member of the board of studies. So I'm really glad to be back here, and I'm really happy to see it grow the way it is growing. So job well done, sir. Now, having said that, I have a unique position in the sense that I am also academic. Like all of you, I have a background in the university, but for the last 4 years, I'm also dealing with practitioners at the War College. So allow me to boost a little bit. I can claim that I have the understanding of both perspectives, the practitioner perspective as well as the academic perspective. For this very reason, I must highlight that whatever I'm about to say next 10 or 15 or maybe 8 minutes is my personal view and should not be attributed to the organization that I represent. I would only be flagging few issues that I think are important in this evolution, and then we can see how it goes in the discussion. Whenever you talk about evolution of strategic thought in South Asia, I think the first thing, and this was discussed yesterday as well, but I think it's worth highlighting again, what do you mean by South Asia? Or in Pakistan, when we talk about South Asia, what do we mean by South Asia? Do we mean the subcontinent, or do we mean all the countries of South Asia? I leave it for you to decide what do you mean, but I will use South Asia, but I would actually mean the subcontinent, India and Pakistan. Second point that I was thinking was that what should be the starting point of this evolution? Because evolution itself is a very confusing word. It never ends. It never has a beginning. So as we speak, strategic studies and strategic thought is evolving. So especially with the concept of where we are, should we start with Chanakya, who, by the way, was, even if he was not son of the soil, he spent most of his time in Potohar, where we are sitting right now, or should we start with the Gakhar tribe, which gave stiff resistance to all invaders, starting from Alexander up to Mahmud Ghaznavi? Or should we start with Mahabharat, which has a linkage with what is today's Chikwal? Or should we simply start with 1947 onwards? So the structural realist in me told me that keep it simple, start with 1947. So that is what I'm starting from. So my first point is, what exactly do we mean when we say strategic thought? A very simple or basic definition of strategic thought would be leading ideas of military and civilian strategists about the threat and the application of power to fulfill the ends of policy. It does not evolve in a vacuum, so there are certain factors that contribute to it. It's a long list, but most important of them are historical experience, geographical compulsions, prevailing ideas, and competing realities. Now, as all of you already are aware, South Asia, India, Pakistan gained independence at a very turbulent time in global history. While South Asia was grappling with the upheavals of partition and post-partition institution building, the world was being divided into two blocks. And this was obviously something that neither of the two countries can ignore, although their approach was slightly different. In case of Pakistan, Pakistan inherited the British India's threat perception without the resources that British India had. And that was one of the major problems that we suffered onwards. India, on the other hand, and when I say India, I mean like India under Nehru had a very clear understanding of what India is. And it was actually derived from what Lord Curzon, once Viceroy of India, thought of India. And I just very quickly want to tell you that according to Curzon, the master of India must, under modern conditions, be the greater power in the Asiatic continent. And therefore, it must be added in the world. The central position of India, its magnificent resources, its teeming multitude of men, its great trading harbors, its reserves of military strength are assets of precious value. And this is exactly what Nehru talked about when he claimed that India is the third pillar, or India is the emerging global power. So the understanding that India is a major player is not something that is recent. In more recent times, Steve Cohen is the one who came up with this idea, but as you can see, Lord Curzon long ago talked about it, and Nehru adopted it. So Indian strategic thought can be divided into three phases, although we are dealing with the first one only, but I will very briefly touch upon the other two as well, so that you can understand the context. The first one was during the Cold War era, that is from 47 to 1992. The second is from 1992 to 2014. And the third is where we are living in, that started in 2014. In the first phase, the Indian strategic thinkers followed what could be summarized as modern day Arthashastra, and they viewed the Indian subcontinent as a single strategic whole, with India as the driver or the controller of the strategic whole. In this phase, they viewed the world through three strategic circles. And this is why I'm saying that it is modern day Arthashastra. First circle was about domestic level. That was the core. The second was regional concerns. That included the neighborhood, except one country. And the third was global concern in the extended neighborhood. That included Pakistan and China. At the same time, in this phase, India continued perceiving a threat from the north. And if you understand what I mean by the north, you can see that the historical continuity, that all the invaders that used to come from the north, and after partition, you can work out who is in the north or who is in control of that corridor. And this threat was not only physical, it was ideological as well. This was the phase when the Indian strategic thinker and the Indian strategist followed a land-centric military strategy or approach. And Navy during this phase, and to some extent Air Force as well, they were considered Cinderella services, if you can take the drift. During the post-Cold War, the biggest dilemma for the Indians was the closed economy and the fact that USSR was not there anymore to deal with them. You can stop me whenever you want. I have a record of giving a lecture for 4 hours non-stop. So don't look at me.
So you have got 6 minutes.
Okay. But you have, it's totally in your hand. But luckily, they had one visionary economist as a finance minister. Most of you would know his name, Manmohan Singh. He started a reforms program that dragged India out of it. And then once the economic situation stabilized in India, as it happens, India started using that economic might into expanding its military might. And that is the time when India started talking about enforcing its own Monroe Doctrine. And the first stage was becoming a major Asian power. Then came the nuclear tests and the China threat. The Americans very clearly said that now India is a nuclear power. We cannot ignore India. Stroke Talbot was the man who was given the task, and he was my boss as Brookings, and he was writing his memoirs when I was there. If you haven't read it, you should, and you will see how Jaswant Singh actually made a fool out of Strobe, if you allow me to say. In these two phases, the Indian strategic thought was driven by certain schools. First one was Nehruvianism. Second was neoliberalism, Marxism, Gandhiism, hypernationalism, and Hindutva. The third phase is where only one school is in control. I hope you understand the significance in 2014. That is when Narendra Modi took over India as the Prime Minister for the first time. So since then, we see the triumph of Hindutva and now Modiization of India. So in the current Indian discourse, India is part of a big league now. Pakistan is not a match to India. It's too small a fry. Nuclear weapons are irrelevant in dealing with Pakistan, and Pakistan can very easily be dealt with sub-conventional or hybrid warfare. Now, very quickly about Pakistan strategic thought. Now, 1947, it was a new state, a new nation under a new leadership. It was based on ideology, so local historical experiences and traditions were not taken into account because they were not in sync with the ideology. Then was the trauma of partition, which gave rise to the idea that India has not and will never accept the reality of Pakistan, which gave birth to the sense of insecurity. And Pakistan believed that Afghanistan, 1947 onwards, is working in cahoots with India against Pakistan. So being a weaker state, Pakistan needs to work on its national security. Now, this sense then resulted into the lookout or search for a balancer or a stronger ally. We started with British Commonwealth, couldn't get any. Muslim world, the then king of Egypt said that Pakistanis think that Islam was born on the 14th August 1947. So that also didn't work out. Then we joined the alliance with USA. 1965 changed that perception. After that, we switched to China. The fifth point in this sense is the curse of geography. As I said earlier, Pakistan inherited British India's threat perception without British India's resources. And that is something that is still on. Today, very quickly, and just 3 points and then I'll end. So I'll finish before that. We still focus on hard security, although the consensus that is emerging is no bloc politics. We will not join blocs. Whether it could actually be done or not, that's a different thing. Geography still plays the most significant role, and nuclear weapons are weapons of last resort, but they are to ensure our security. We don't have weapons to project power. It's purely for security reasons. With this, I'll stop, and I look forward to if there are any questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much for presenting practitioner's perspective. Dr. Zeeb talked on tracing the roots of strategic thought in South Asia, and then he discussed on threat perception of India and Pakistan, especially in the case of Pakistan, as if we are the besieged fortress surrounded by the hostile forces bent on destroying everything. So thank you very much. Now I would invite Dr. Rubina Wasim. She would be talking on impact of superpower rivalry on South Asian strategic thought. Ma'am, floor is all yours.
First of all, I would like to thank FES and FASS for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very pertinent issue and obviously not being discussed much. And secondly, it would be a challenge for me because I'm speaking in front of my mentors, Dr. Adil, Sargunuri, and sharing the panel with my seniors and my teacher, Dr. Salma Malik. So I know that if I have anything wrong and anything went wrong, I have to face the consequences right away. So with this, I will be vigilant enough to talk about the impact of superpower rivalry on South Asian strategic thought. So as Dr. Rizwan was mentioning, that strategic thought is much, much more than only geography, only religion, tradition, customs, and much more. He has started his talk when he was referring to strategic thought since 47. So let me take you a little bit back, because I think that strategic thought has been derived It's an enduring thought process, and it comes not from the religion, because we have lots of things common when we talk about the strategic culture of South Asia, from Indians, Hindu, Maurya Empire, but yet Indus, Mesopotamia. So these features are that strategic thought that flows. It sometimes comes from strategists, sometimes it comes from a theorist, but that's how strategic thought works when we talk about it. And it's one of the elements of strategic culture. Strategic culture is much, much more than that. Only tangible element in strategic culture is geography. Rest are what the strategic thought is referring to, that intangible elements, but have their part and play very glaring, it's a very glaring feature. When we talk about the Pakistan's context, then the civilization in the South Asia, in this civilization has a very glaring feature, which we are talking about, or we are referring as Pakistan right now. But it's not enough to explain when I explain strategic thought. So it's not confined in that civilization. There are many other civilizations. So as Dr. Rizwan has mentioned a lot from 47 since up till now. So I will be covering a little bit back when I'm referring to Dravidians, Mauryan Empire, Aryans, Mesopotamia, and Indus itself. So here I'm not going into the detail, because then I will be dragged into a different debate, which is not obviously about superpower rivalry, but just to refer that Mauryan Empire has its impact. Dr. Rizwan was mentioning Chandragupta Maurya, he was an advisor, and his role, and then Dravidians, that Lanka context, which was being conquered by Ravan in Ramayana, that is also which is Sri Lanka right now. When we're talking about the Aryans, they were the invaders, but they have footprints in South Asian strategic thought. So it's like most of the time when we are referring to how Islam came with the rule of Muhammad bin Qasim Sindh, yes, that at that point of time, that Middle Eastern civilization was also with Saudi Arabian ambassador was here. In recent times. So it was also one of the affiliation that is present when we talk about the present Pakistan. And in this, yes, in this itself is a very, very Asian civilization and has an impact. So it's like manifestation of South Asian thought is derived from many civilizations. It have like it's a cross polarization in the society, and it has impact on the South Asian with the advent of Islam, then Ashoka rule. But by the way, Ashoka ruled for 130 years, and Mughal Empire lasted more than 1100 years. So I think that glaring impact is there in the South Asian. So it has always been a small princely state. So it was not always like in a central government. So they have their own identities, own languages. So number of languages, number of villages, identities, Buddhas, and all. We have in Shala Dita, we have Buddha caves, which is obviously have impact on our strategic thought too. So with referring to that Mughal Empire, and we were discussing about the British colonial rule, and Dr. Farhan was referring that it's a debatable thing that whether that decolonization is present right now, but or still we are not decolonized. So I will leave this to the Q&A session and would love to answer on that those patterns. So now I'm basically taking the leverage not to repeat anything. So Dr. Rizwan has mentioned about the partition view, and I'm not referring to that partition. And let's come to the Cold War era. So what happened in the Cold War? How superpowered in? So it was like I was referring back that in external powers and the element has been the part of strategic thought of South Asia. But what happened during Cold War? Now there are different factors that help when we talk about how strategic thought was being evolved during the Cold War era and what was the impact. Now, when first of all, alignment with superpowers and why Pakistan aligned with Western power, there are different patterns for that. There was one ideological concept of being Ahle Kitab, and that what Liaquat Ali Khan was being told about. And then language was also one of the feature. And then the context that communists are non-believers, kafir. This concept was also being present in the strategic thought. That's why they decided to be aligned with the West. And why India aligned, India under the title of NAM, non-alignment movement. That was the idea, and obviously Nehru also propagated it. But still, why they aligned it? Because they were still part of of communist bloc and the context of that Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. Obviously, that turned after 62 is Hindi Chini Bye Bye, but still that strategic thought has emerged within India itself, and when we're talking about, and we're referring to Pakistan. To the next point, nuclear arms race. What superpower played in this context? In context of nuclear arms race, India, with the assistance of United States of America, conducted its peaceful nuclear test of Smiling Buddhas. And they converted it for the nuclear weapon program, which obviously instigated the debate that we should have also our own nuclear program because of the defensive needs. That's why Pakistan initiated the debate. But at that time, Pakistan was quite relevant in the Soviet war or Soviet disintegration. That's why at that time, United States of America ignored a bit about our process, our progress towards nuclear weapon program. So that's how they contributed in it. That's the context. But then this arms race and why India was it? Because of the COPA principle. The Kautilya was being mentioned by Dr. Rizwan that that COPA principle which says that your immediate neighbor is always your enemy. So that's why they thought that they have to be their immediate neighbor, Chinese as well, and Pakistan as well. So the next point would be very interesting when we talk about the proxy conflict. So because of, fortunately and unfortunately, because of this geostrategic location, which we are having in South Asia, which is obviously conjunction point, there are many other factors that played role in proxy as well. Now, what happened in proxy? That Pakistan became relevant because of the Afghan war, and Mujahideen concept was there. And suddenly what happened after 9/11, things changed. Tables were switched. Now what happened that the Mujahideen were the terrorists. This U-turn has a very glaring impact on the South Asian strategic thought. Now you're referring, this instigated the debate, religious debate within the society, within Pakistan, and what happened to India. India was comparatively irrelevant in this context, but what India did, they very smartly sold the narrative of Kashmir with the concept of Atankawadi. Now, this was there earlier as well, but that became saleable at the point of time when they were referring, when even Hillary Clinton herself accepted that we are fighting with the problem we have created by ourselves. So obviously, she has had to face lots of consequences after that in the United States, but that's what she said. But then Trump said billions and billions of dollars have been invested on Pakistan. Pakistan is not doing more. So now, what strategic thought have to do with all these things? Now, the superpower rivalry is having an impact. And next point will be, I think so. Thank you, Dr. Zahid. I'll try to switch the debate. Now, in US-India partnership, now the blocks have been changed. Now India became relevant with that of Kautilya. Let me refer to that Kautilya's policy when he says that when your enemy is powerful, make alliance with them. So with this rule, they got aligned Pakistan because of that billions and billions dollars of claim by Trump. We had to face the mistrust, element of mistrust. Mark Fitzpatrick once wrote that US-Pakistan has been a roller coaster ride relationship between them. So that roller coaster ride dragged us towards the Chinese bloc, though we had the relations with China were deeper than ocean, higher than mountain, and sweeter than honey. But that was also because of the peaceful rise policy. And obviously that tilt was because Chinese themselves have faced that imperialism a lot throughout their history. So that's why it was not a one power. That's why it helped us to, so I know it will be a debatable issue. So I will be looking forward to the Q&A debate. And because of Dr. Zahid's, let me end with the shift in alliances and partnership, and that is obviously Asia-Pacific politics, where making peace with one and waging war with another. That is the double policy of Kautilya. They would have the principle of one of the principle of six-fold policy. So it also played the role because they are partner in I2U2 Quad Asia Indo-Pacific strategy as well. So it is also playing one of the clearing feature when we are referring to it. So let me end with how would we conclude this, that India will be able to retain the strategic block of balance between the superpowers throughout, and like they did in Cold War and so as right now. And with the Hindutva rise, there are lots of questions that has been portrayed on the Hindu secularism policy when that was being propagated with the title of oldest democracy of the world. So now West is also raising questions on that. Let me refer to one of the Carnegie Endowment book of Christoph, that was the fate of secularism in India. And he has discussed that now it is in question mark whether it is secularism or whether it has been changing after the elections of BJP in 2014 and right now. So the book was published in 2019. So with this, I will end that the recent developments in South Asia and that strategic, evolving strategic thinking is superpowers have played very glaring and very important role in it. And it is still being lasted because of the fight of the national interest among both the, as I've mentioned, more, my focus was more on India and Pakistan. Thank you so much. I hope I made my time.
Thank you, Dr. Veena. Dr. Veena talked about the strategic culture, where the security policies emanate from. And the second point, he emphasized that how we give meaning to our national interest, the way Pakistan gave meaning while cultivating its relationship with the USA. We shared one God with them, at least against godless communism. The third point she focused on the systemic structures, how systemic structures of the Cold War compelled Pakistan and India in their threat perception and resultant partnerships and alliances. And finally, she showed her concern about rising illiberalism, authoritarianism in the name of Hinduification under Modi's nose in India. Thank you very much. Here we have the last panelist, Dr. Salma Malik, and she will be talking on alternative regional perspectives on security studies in South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zahir. And Rubina, I assure you, no glances, I'm least prepared, right? So thank you for setting the stage very well. And thank you, Rizwan. My deepest gratitude to Adil, to FASS, and to FES for providing us with this opportunity. And of course, the laugh is on us. We talk about indigenous discourse, South Asian cultures and all, and the funding we don't have indigenously. And that's what basically leads me to look at developing alternative perspectives in security studies from within the region. So that's part of the larger problem with this picture. So when we're looking at what is happening in South Asia and the development of alternative discourses, as both my co-panelists have already highlighted it very amply, number one, South Asia as a region, however you define it, the 7+1 country of South Asia, as a region has been a very security-centric region. And given its security centricism, what we technically find in South Asian security discourse is also a very traditionalist approach, and which has largely dominated the flavor of South Asia's security literature or security narrative that we can talk of. And so thereby, whenever we look at what is security studies in South Asia, we would find too much of overwhelming literature on conflict, on wars, on foreign policy, on defense policy, on various aspects. And one more thing that I need to add here is that when you're looking at a security-centric approach, and here again, we take security as the traditionalist approach of security, because that's how our minds have been attuned to it. When we're looking at these notions, security studies by its nature is very siloed. It is a state's narrative. So when we're looking at a state-based security narrative, it would never be inclusive. It would very much be inward-looking and going in that direction. And you need to make a very concerted effort to have a regional approach. And unfortunately, South Asia has been very late in developing a regional approach, if any, so to speak. However, it's not all bad news, because there have been some very strong efforts and attempts, including the one which we are sharing today, can also lead to a larger discourse in future if such traditions are carried forward. After Adil, I think within a week, 10 days time, Lahore School of Economics is also holding a similar exercise, although with a slightly different flavor. But I think we need to have more such exercises where we can deliberate and come up with some kind of an approach. So number one, the history of the very nature of this beast leads us to a state-centric approach when we're looking at security discourse. Secondly, the post-colonial impact, how the history of this region developed, was highly reflective in the earlier discourse that developed or the earlier works that developed. And actually using the term discourse is an anomaly because we hardly have a South Asian discourse, so to speak, because the discourse requires a long drawn effort to come to a common point, to have a common language. So we don't have a discourse, we don't have a common language. We have various countries talking about security from their own particular platforms. So that's at best what South Asia finds here. Then with this linear account of history, we also have this partition trauma, which when we look at the security deliberations is again viewed from a state prism, where the us versus them is very pronounced. However, and here I need to kindly broadcast what little work that I did in a cross-disciplinary genre, and that was while looking at partition cinema, myself and another of my Indian colleagues, we looked at how the cinema has portrayed or the literature has portrayed the partition. Again, the stuff was the same. It had a breakup of the countries. It had division of assets, but it also had division of memories. It had division of people. It had division of their sense of belongingness. And when you put that as part of the literature, it gives you a very different viewpoint. So the prism, all you need to do is just adjust or readjust the prism, and you find a very different approach to the same state-centric narrative that we are trying to build. And again, because it was a nation-building exercise in the earlier decades, even today, and more so because with Modi, another phase of nationalism has entered India-Pakistan story. So that sense of nationalism making India a different story altogether from the South Asian thing makes this partition trauma or the narrative on partition also a very, very politicized notion. But if you're looking at it from a different angle, we are giving it a literary approach, we are looking at it from a people-centric approach, then the trauma, the pain suffered by a Hindu woman or a Muslim woman, a Bengali lady or a Pakistani lady appears to be the same. However, we don't want to look at it from this angle because that makes us connect with the other, and we don't want to connect with the other. And that is the main problem. So that notion also happened. Largely in the South Asian deliberations or work on security studies, we also find a very strong imprint of what was happening at the global platform. The point that both Rubina talked about as well as Dr. Rizwan talked about, having that the three concerted levels. So from the state, there was a direct connection to the globe with the regional ring intentionally missing. Because during the Cold War, much part of the Cold War did not have a regional flavor to it. It was Pakistan connecting with the US, the CETO-CENTO, friends not masters, India going the NAM way, India connecting with Soviet Union. So again, there was no work on South Asia. And then we had the wars, and the wars made us further disconnect. And then we had 1971, after which we did not really have anything to do with whatever was coming out of Bangladesh. And the 1971 war also made Pakistan reevaluate or rewrite its history. So there's a huge chunk missing in every country's historical security text, which does not talk about the painful episodes or the painful lessons that we should have learned from whatever was happening in these eventful years. What Pakistan ended up missing was that some very good literature, some very good work coming from Bangladesh, from Bengali authors, we never studied. We never really wanted to connect with that. But unfortunately, and if I'm being very critical about our own country, our country is by and large very oral narratives. We don't really believe in reading books. We don't really believe in going beyond a 3-minute read approach. And now with the internet and the chat GPT, the world has become all the more simpler. So just feed in what you want to hear, and you'll exactly get a tailor-made version of what the things are. What we really need to develop is that culture of going back to books, feeling the book, not having that online books, but feeling the books, making these people rich again. And that is also part of the security culture that countries have. If you look at India right next door, you would find umpteenth publishing houses. Not only indigenous publishing houses like Macmillan, Sage, Palgrave Martin, many of them who have the India chapter, and they're producing books by the dozen, which also means that India is a huge country with a huge population. And even if you give one book each to one university or a higher education institution in India, the book has really made its mark. But also the fact that you need to have that kind of a system that promotes indigenous literature, also the studies that you find there. Then, as I talked about the siloed version and siloed approach, we also find this notion that in the security studies discourse, there were few kosher subjects that one could talk about and few subjects that people were uncomfortable about. Civil-military relations being one of those subjects. We would feel, unless it was a very state-sponsored approach, it was an approach that talked, that was a very sanitized type of version of the civil-military relations, questions made you uncomfortable. And then we have also shunned the critical studies approach. So because we are not looking at critical studies, we don't have that criticality in our study discourse. So that also gives us this notion where we are replicating popular work, we are replicating theories and tailoring them to our needs. And we don't really have a South Asian perspective on which we can build our narrative and on which we can build a common vision. Furthermore, South Asia is not beyond India, Pakistan. We don't even look at the other countries.
Yes.
So quickly, 5 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
I just started. Okay. So because of this notion, then we also find this aspect that we are ignoring other things. When we were looking at the Cold War, we were looking at the traditional approach. Was there any other perspective on the rise? Yes, there were. There was Mehboob Haq with his human security discourse. There were the subaltern studies, which were working. But again, these studies became very limited to the Indian side of the story. Alongside this, we had two further things happening. We had South Asian Studies Associations working in foreign capitals. In UK, in the University of Lund was in Sweden is doing some work. There are several universities in the USA who have South Asian Studies Associations, but these study associations are also becoming Indian Studies Associations increasingly because the Pakistani version is missing. We are not doing cross-disciplinary work. We are not doing interdisciplinary work. Alongside that, they're also becoming anthropological. They are becoming more historically tailored than otherwise. So I think we also need to change our vision into that. A little bit on what we have done in the region to develop a security-centric vision. We have had the RCSS coming up. We have also had people like Gohar Rizvi, who was one of the initial authors on regional security framework. But once Barry Buzan and Olive Weaver wrote that big book that we take as a Bible on regional security, Gohar Bhai's work went missing. But the first book on regional security, that was the primer that led to Region and Powers book, was co-authored by Rizvi Bhai. Another very important person, Iftikharuz Zaman, again coming from Bangladesh, along with Shelton Kodikara, was the one who wrote, who were part of the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, a center that had a traditional as well as non-traditional security stream that has given birth to many of us who are part of this larger discourse today. Unfortunately, owing to the funding issue, something that was brought up yesterday, and I'm so sorry, I would take additionally 2-3 minutes from you on this point. What we have found is that either we have regional institutions which are funded by foundations such as the FASS, which again are bound by the type of funding they're getting from their taxpayers. So if the flavor of the funding is for climate change, then the work has to be on climate change, and they're bound by that. So you cannot have a very holistic vision when it comes to these notions. The answer to these problems are that you can only and only have some sort of indigenous funding that flows in the direction, and it is also comfortable enough to allow you to experiment the unexpected and then see what type of literature evolves out of that. In Pakistan, the only regional institute that worked in the entire region wanted to contribute was the Institute of Regional Studies. And a few years back, we all attended its funeral, and then it got resuscitated, thankfully, by another ministry, which put in some money, and they brought it up back. But what is the IRS today? It is no longer a regional-centric institute. It is an institute which is working on everything under the sun. And it is no different than any other institute that we have here. The RCS is with its Mehboob-ul Haq Award. One of the recipients is sitting in the audience who just recently won the award. I think that was the Kodikara or the Mehboob-ul Haq. The Mehboob-ul Haq Award actually encouraged collaborative study, and that brought many of us together. But how many in this audience know about the real gurus of collaborative study who developed a common vision and no separate voices? The 3 Cs, under whose tutelage we all really benefited. Parvez Iqbal Cheema, P.R. Chari from India, and Stephen Philip Cohen. They came together and they worked on some very uncomfortable topics. And they had one voice. They didn't have a common voice. They developed a singular voice, and they looked at various notions. Last but not least, because I know I've really overstepped my time, the pandemic actually provides us with a golden opportunity where, again, the South Asian countries, because we also have issues of physical connectivity, we don't get visas to each other's country, provided us with a wonderful opportunity, and that was to work on non-traditional security issues, common threats, transcending boundaries, and looking at issues and connecting online, doing some excellent work. Yet most of that work remains subdued because of the overwhelming state-centric approach. Another aspect is the women voice is largely missing. And I must compliment our friend Rabia Akhtar and few of the younger ladies who are taking a lot of lead in this aspect, that they are bringing the women voice to the front in the pure traditional security studies realm as well. There's very little work on in our common languages, in our regional languages. So that is not happening. So to conclude, if we really want to have an alternative discourse on security studies in the region, we need to step out of our comfort zones, and we need to experiment the unexpected and look at domains that can bring us together, that can connect us, and virtually we can do a lot more. And I think we all have, especially the young people, have the potential to transcend the state boundaries, to develop an indigenous vision, to shun away the state narratives and look at what can commonly be constructed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Salma emphasized the need for having alternative epistemic community, divergent from state-centric security thinking. She also emphasized on cultural text and critical text in our academic and everyday writing discourses. while listening to Dr. Salma, a renowned Pakistani scholar, Dr. Wasim, resonated into my mind, who believes that nations are like generations. When narratives are embedded into nationalism, these are non-starters. When we talk about South Asia and having alternative approaches and epistemic communities, we need to go beyond the typical national state-centric epistemes and other thinkings. With this all, now we are moving towards the final round, Q&A session. We will have a round of questions, and please identify yourself and then identify the respondent you are asking the question to. Dr. Moines, please.
Thank you very much. Wonderful session, absolutely. Particularly what Salma basically concluded about the lack of strategic initiatives in as far as the institutional building is concerned. Now, Dr. Rizwan, post-1947, strategic thought, strategic culture, could you name an icon in India post-1947, strategic icon? Because individuals and institutions play a role. So that icon shaped after 1947 the Indian strategic culture, Indian strategic thought, and the institution also where he was associated. So could you name that individual? You can do it. You can do it while responding, because his legacy still continues. As far as Salma is concerned, I think you rightly observed that how the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, and let me share with you the story that how the RCSS was formed. That there was, I'll take only 2 minutes, that there was a meeting, the 3 C's, Chima, Chari, Cohen, and also Shelton Kodikara.
So please ask the question, please.
Yeah,
we have lots of people.
Yeah, I know, I understand. In that meeting, they decided to launch as far as RCS is concerned. So my question is to Salma, that what is the impediment in Pakistan for shaping and reshaping strategic culture, particularly in the context of civil-military relations? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Myself, Samiullah, I'm a student of BS Strategic Studies first semester. I have a question from Dr. Rubina Wasim, that isn't it possible that the South Asian countries strategically leverage the superpowers rivalry other than being a passive recipient of the influence? If yes, then is this possible that it was a good move, or we have to, but alternative approach we should take to as we go forward? Like if like the strategically that they strategically leverage the superpowers rivalry, was that for their own interest, or was it a recipient in move of influence?
Thank you, Sami. Yasir, back in the row.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Yasir Khan Kakad, student of BSIR 6th semester. So my question is directed towards Ma'am Salma Malik. Journals such as foreign policy, foreign affairs, the diplomat, the national interest, and the others, they have the privilege of a greater audience, and they are even providing judgment on South Asian politics. Do you think South Asia is behind Western countries even when it comes to explaining its own issues? If it is true, what do you think is the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can respond, and we will have another round of questions as well. Dr. Salma, please respond to Dr. Muni's questions.
Gee, thank you so much, Dr. Munis, sir. And I think you also deserve an equal compliment. You're one of the most understated people whom we usually don't give the the credit that you have also encouraged and brought to fore many young, struggling researchers of yesteryear through your conferences, and gave them that confidence and opportunity that they came to this where they are today, and we stand where they are. And you all were part of that original team that not only brought our CSS to fore, it also brought then later initiatives such as the COSAT, which is based in Nepal, and WISCOM, which is based in India. What is the impediment in shaping and reshaping the strategic culture? I think it's in the nature of the beast. How the security operators are looking at the security, that is going to shape or reshape the strategic discourse. If you're looking at it, there are certain areas where we can work very easily, where we can develop a discourse or narrative a little more easily than otherwise. And also it is the center to the periphery debate that I wanted to highlight, and we couldn't, where the center is looking at certain things from a particular angle, and the peripheries are not. Although now we also have certain strategic institutes which are going to the peripheral capitals and doing some work and developing a common narrative, but that has not been the case with other issue areas. So I think if there is a wider appeal to the type of work that needs to be done, things could be better, or things could be more comprehensive in their flavor. Are we behind other countries as South Asia when it comes to research or publishing? I wouldn't say that about Indians, because they're doing a lot of work. What we are as Pakistanis, and some of us who are not publishing enough in foreign publications, is the fact that we also don't know how to publish there. We also don't realize what is the flavor, how to approach, or what the research methodologies of approaching in those areas. So I write a paper, and I write it the way I've been taught how to write a paper, which is a very, very simplistic way of looking at it. There is no critical discourse in it. And if I expect that it's going to be published, it's an international publication, they're going to look at the type of readership that's going to read it. And it has to be of a particular standard. We also have this notion where many times we say that something coming out of Pakistan, especially on Kashmir, especially on certain issues, will never get published because it is providing Pakistan state discourse. It's a mix and match of several things, but it's also the fact that we need to learn how to actually understand, comprehend what these international publications require, and write the same stuff, what we need to write, the country's perspective, from an angle that cannot be ignored, and then that gets published. So I think it's a mix and match of both. Thank you.
Ma'am Rubina.
In response to the question that was being asked, that whether superpowers have their own interest in the region, or why they played that role I've referred during my presentation. Yes, of course, superpower have its own role. There was one of the Atlantic Council's report that was published in 2017, which was talking about the second nuclear age and what role superpowers had played for the conflict resolution in South Asia specifically. So here you can see what role it has played. Like in case of conflict resolution, Kashmir is still there. No step has been taken even from China. CPEC is obviously Chinese's own interest. So it's part of that One Belt, One Road initiative, and obviously they are working with Pakistan in this context. When we talk about United States of America, obviously no footsteps you have seen. United States of America, no serious steps have been taken by any superpower, including Russia, except vetoing the issue of Kashmir on Security Council. That was it. So now that MIC is working, proxy conflicts are working in South Asia. So they're having their own interests, they have their own agendas, and they're working for it. But in case of South Asia, we have SARC. Obviously, they are working for that. So in SARC, when we refer to India is the major player for the economic collaborations with Bangladesh, with Nepal, with Bhutan. But that is a regional setup. When we talk about the superpowers role, so unfortunately they have utilized that opportunities to work for their own interests. That's how it works.
Dr. Rizwan, do you have something to respond?
Okay, that was almost like a Viva question, but a very interesting one. K. Subramaniam, obviously, his influence still remains on the Indian strategic discourse. And the irony is that his son is now the foreign minister of India. जिस तरह वो हमासा का एक मिसरा है, उसकी उर्दू ट्रांसलेशन ये है कि नूह के घर के नान पैदा होते रहते हैं. So while K. Subramaniam had a very different understanding and vision of India, I think his son has his own, which he has articulated in his two books. I just want to quickly add one thing where I have the unique honor of what I the three C's, but when it comes to RCSS, there was another fourth C as well. That was Chris Smith, who had the arms control school in Nathia Galid, which was then made into the summer workshop at RCSS. Yes, so they are not three C's, but four C's. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Sana, then Ma'am Aisha. I will get back to you, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sana Sardar, student of BSIR 4th semester, Air University. I'm addressing my query towards Ma'am Rubina Wasim. Ma'am, does the presence of competing superpower in South Asia contribute to region stability, peacekeeping, or increase the risk of conflict escalation? And where is this leading us?
Thank you. Ma'am Aisha, please.
Thank you so much. This is Aisha Malik, and my first question is directed. Can I have two questions, please? Two quick, brief questions to two of the speakers. Thank you. First question is directed towards Dr. Rizwan Zaib, that in basic understanding as a student, political science obligates international relations theoretically, and international relations obligates strategic studies theoretically. If not, then what are the theoretical and methodological basis for strategic studies? And my second question is directed towards Dr. Salma Malik, that since it has been a state-centric approach, do you think that we need to redefine South Asian state? And can you please suggest any models for that? Thank you.
Thank you. Adil.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adil Azimi from BSIR 3rd semester, Air University. My question is directed to the panelists. India's strategic partnership with the US and its deepening economic ties with China is in stark comparison to Pakistan's relationship with both. Do we have a viable strategy for a balanced relationship with both, or is that not in our capacity right now?
Thank you very much. The gentleman sitting in the first row.
Right. So I'm Shamsu Zaman from Namal University, and this is a topic which is quite close to my heart because actually I'm doing my PhD research on this topic. Now, sir, as you know, and my question is to Dr. Rizwan Zaid. You know, sir, that the formation of this Hindutva movement and all that, that started in early 1900s. But we see that till 1990s, probably that Hindutva nationalism was not quite predominant in the Indian strategic culture and thought. But after 90s, when this was this Rath Yatra and all that BJP element started preaching the Hindu nationalism, then we see that this Hindutva element started dominating the Indian strategic culture. So there are two ways of looking at it. First, that it was always there, but there was a sort of a cover-up faces of Nehruism, Gandhiism, and secularism and all that. And it was just that the international environment was not suitable for that. And it was after once the Cold War ended, the real face of the Indian strategic culture came up. Or the other way could be that
it actually started transforming with the passage of time, and eventually it ended up into this. So how you look at it? Is there is a transformation, or it was always there and just waiting for the right moment?
Thank you very much. I would urge my panelists, be brief in your responses so we have more and more questions. Otherwise, I have to squeeze. Dr. Rizwan?
Okay, on the question of political science and IR and strategic study, this is exactly what I was referring to. What happens is that, if we start or keep that in mind that, the mother of all knowledge is philosophy. But then if you look at philosophy and you look at what physics talks about, they both talk about why we are here, what we are doing, and what is the universe all about. So which is more important, philosophy or physics? It's a matter of debate who you talk to. If you talk to a philosopher, he will tell you that I am doing the core work, whereas a physicist would say, I have a more logical explanation to what this universe is all about. So when it comes to like strategic studies, IR debate, yes, they are both offshoots of political science or political thinking. But I really don't want to be taking a particular position here because I know I'm surrounded by those who are students of IR and I'm a realist. But I must say that, the first chair of international relations at Aberystwyth was actually talking about causes of war. Not a subject of international relations, but a subject which is now dealt with strategic studies. So that was the original direction of the subject, and then it switched to the other side, and now we have strategic studies, which is now a more dominant, more grounded in what you call the realist school. On the question of Hindutva and like whether it was always there or it is something, I'll very quickly tell you a story, very brief. Once a sculptorist dragged a stone and worked on it for months and made a statue out of it. People saw that and they said, you made a masterpiece. He said, I did nothing. The statue was already there. I just chipped away the rough edges. So the idea was already there. You're right. But it was Modi who you can actually credit it to making it into a political ideology. Because mind you, today we consider Vajpayee a statesman who was also BJP. Advani became an advocate of India-Pakistan peace. Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, our High Commissioner, when he was kicked out of New Delhi, Advani actually invited him for a cup of tea before he leaves. So that's exactly the thing. Just because something was there is not reason enough that, it will happen. Someone has to do it. And it's Modi who did it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aisha. I don't think that we need to redefine South Asia as a new construct in a sense that add, delete countries and all. Although already South Asia is working on a -1 formula, if you look at it from the Indian perspective, how you look at, how you perceive a particular notion. Secondly, however debatable this idea is, South Asia is also a very well-defined geographic construct. And we look at South Asia from a very geostrategic angle than otherwise. It is what the members of South Asia want the region to be. If you want to look at South Asia as a collectivity of independent thinking countries, then we would remain very siloed. If you want to develop a collective vision, which the post-pandemic time has provided us with, then we can look at areas of common concern, health security, food security, and we have many areas of common concern, which far override the traditional concerns. When the nuclear weapons happen, then we won't have such debates at all. We would either be dead or praying to die. So I think what is happening in real time, if we develop a common vision and look at it, then that can work out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma'am Rubina, please.
So the first question was asked by one of the students over here, and she was referring to where we are going. So with where we are going, if you mean where Pakistan is going, Pakistan is being pushed because of that element of mistrust that was at the end of the United States of America. So in my conclusion, I've mentioned that now that diplomatic and economic pressures may lead to Pakistan towards that Chinese, Russian, and Iranian bloc. But yes, it is a speculative idea. And if you're referring to where South Asia is going, in case of India, India is very cleverly balancing those strategies that were of the superpower. So India have oil relationship or oil trade with Ukraine as well. At the same point of time, they are a strategic partner of with United States of America. And the second question, one of the gentlemen was asking regarding the US-India strategic partnership and what options Pakistan have. Pakistan has already played lots of worked on this field when we are talking about that partnership, that peaceful nuclear reactors, which was that waiver of LSG that was being granted because of that US-India nuclear deal, and Pakistan has also applied for the and the application is there because of the Chinese stance. The debate is still on hold, but these are the options Pakistan is trying, and Pakistan has security concerns regarding that, and officially Pakistan's policy is engagement with all. So I cannot be brief as much as possible.
Thank you, ma'am. We can have yet another round of 4 questions. The gentleman standing for the last 5-6 minutes first, and lady on the back. My questions, please approach that lady. Then Ma'am Aiza and Mr. Jawar, last one. Sorry, I won't be able to take your questions. You can ask those questions on the team. Sorry for that.
I'm Kamar Shahzad from University of the Punjab, Lahore. I'm a student of IR third semester, and my question to Dr. Rizwan, that when we discuss South Asia's strategic culture, names like Chanakya, Porwa emerge, yet here in Pakistan, we neither appraise them nor accept them. So with the complete dismemberment of the ancient history of Greater India, excluding Hindus and Sikhs from the identity, do you believe this task of generating debate on the South Asian episteme is achievable in Pakistan?
Thank you.
Dr. Sabrina Hussain, Coventry University. I'm an associate professor there and I'm just visiting, and I was very fortunate to catch this conference. Apologies, I missed your session, but I have an interest in SARC. I have a PhD student working on SARC. And the question I have, I guess, to the panelists is, how do we revive SARC, and is it even possible? Or should we be looking to alternative regional organizations?
Who your question is directed to? Ma'am Aiza, please.
Dr. Zahid. My question is to Dr. Salma. Picking up from your last point, Dr. Salma, with regards to the publications and the kind of quality that we need to have in terms of getting them published. I think it's important also to highlight the role of the standards that we set in South Asia. In Pakistan, I'm going to talk about our case, for what kind of publications, what kind of papers we accept. So I think that if publications have certain preferences, I won't call them rules or guidelines, they do have certain preferences about what kind of papers in terms of themes, concepts, and even quality are willing to accept. So what can we do to make that better in order to improve our standards when we contribute to these journals? Thank you.
Thank you. My questions, please approach Jawar Saab and Sir Adil.
Thank you, Dr. Zahid. Finally, I have the opportunity of talking and asking questions. I'm Abdul Jabbar. I'm a student of PhD. Ma'am Rubina is sitting here. She has been my teacher earlier. But my question is to the practitioner, that is Dr. Rizwan. I've been there in Air War College also, so we share that background. Question stems from the statement that Ma'am Salman gave, and that is that we should shun away the narratives or stances of state. But state's narrative and stance are very strong. How to go about it? In India-Pakistan case, perhaps it is not going to be possible for quite some time. India is on a high, one. Second, that we have that suspicion angle about each other, and that is mandala theory of Mr. Chanakya, who is our ancestor in both the cases, and is like on both sides of the question, please, equally. My question is, why can't we, let's say, focus and go down to, let's say, an issue which occurred between Pakistan and Bangladesh in 1971? Why can't we accept it, discuss it, have a common discourse on that, and move on?
Thank you very much. Last question.
I thought I was invisible to you. Okay. This is not a question by me. It's a question by a very promising young scholar, Ali Zia, who is in Monterey, California. He's attending this session. I think it's 2 o'clock in the morning, but he's online. So his question, I think we definitely want to give him an opportunity. This question is to Dr. Salma. How can we shift our research culture from the one that encourages propaganda to the one that relies on methodological rigor? So this question asked by Ali Zia Jafri. I haven't asked this question. Yeah. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm taking the liberty, and I have my own question as well, directed to Dr. Salma. Since yesterday, we have been talking about indigenizing something, but we have not defined indigeneity. What is indigeneity? Is it a quality? Is it an identity? Because I'm borrowing something. If the meaning we have understood of indigeneity, then for the South Asian people, even Islam is also exotic, alien, geospatially, and geoepistemologically. Then how do we reconcile with this thinking? Because we are emotional being, we are religious being. How do we reconcile with this? Thank you very much. Please take the lead, ma'am.
हाँ, जब वो अफगानिस्तान में माइंस का काम आता है तो लेडीज फर्स्ट ही होती है. Starting with Dr. Zahid, where do we start this indigeneity thing from? It is okay. Sorry. I think this is actually a very, very difficult question. Where do we draw the limit? However, it is not very difficult to draw the limit in a sense that even with the advent of Islam, the other religions, the invasions, all that, eventually there comes a point where you do have the South Asian sons of the soil who are looking at things. You have people like Chankya Kotelia, you have other people who are working in this ambience and looking at the security parameters, looking at the discourse from a very land-based approach, the land being South Asia. So that could be a point of departure. But unfortunately, the issue, and that's how do you bell the cat, is that Pakistan draws its history from Muhammad bin Qasim, and the Indians draw their history from something totally different. The river basins are very different. So the civilizational connect becomes different in that regard. But and combining Aisha's question, and I think one another question as well, with this notion is that we don't really need to have a very state-centric approach in a sense that if we keep on looking at the state as the main security narrator, then this particular debate will continue the way it is. And that is how, and no one is actually realistically talking about doing away with the state or the state narrative. What we're also talking about is adding that essential layer of South Asia region, which is very important to look at a holistic security parameter or holistic security debate, which involves common security threats such as food security and other things. You cannot have an online SARC summit where one prime minister or one chief executive of a country does not want to attend because he's sitting on the table. I mean, that's virtually like a schoolboy approach. So you need to look at common security threats from a common lens and also not blame each other that you're pushing pandemic to my border and you're pushing the pandemic away from, or the goodness away from our border, because these threats are non-discriminatory. To Ali's question is how to divert or how to add quality, what Dr. Isa was also asking about, how to make our publications better quality. I think number one, we should stop this number gaming. If you need to be an assistant professor, you have to have these number of publications in this type of publication house, etc. Because instead of adding quality to the content, it has actually added something totally different. And we are master inventors when there comes to doing these shortcuts or short-changing things. So the basic premise of a particular institution was to add quality. We actually made an effort to reverse the entire process. So you pay and you publish. And in case you don't pay and you publish, then you don't make your mark. And you have 10 authors writing on a social sciences issue. What do you write? One paragraph each? I mean, how do you justify what you're doing? So these things need to be reevaluated. And I think there need to be more social scientists on the fora who are looking at publications, who are looking at how this critical security discourse is developed, and working with that. Serena, I'm sorry I missed your question. Yeah, we can hear you.
I have a student who's working on SARC. He's in his first year of his PhD studies. And one of the questions he had, so I suppose I'm asking on his behalf, is it even possible to revive SARC, given the schoolboy sort of approach to SARC summits that you mentioned? And if it isn't possible, or realistic to revive SARC in any meaningful way, should Pakistan be looking at other regional organizations? So I think is it BIMSTEC that India now seems to have a preference for? So is it possible? And if it isn't possible, what are our alternatives? What is Pakistan's alternative?
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I request you to be brief because we are running short of time.
Adil, did I respond to Ali's question? It was diverting from the state-centric approach or an established approach? I think more critical studies, better way of looking at things and developing a deeper lens. If Pakistan, I think none of the two countries, India and Pakistan, because SARC was an initiative by what quote unquote we call the smaller countries, although they were no smaller in their vision or stature, they were never invested in SARC. So they never really put their heart and soul in the process. And so long as we keep having this approach, and wherever India and Pakistan would be together, the approach would be that one tries to cut down the other. Especially India is becoming a pretty big elephant in the room. So unless and until, and I think this is the bigger countries or the bigger brothers' responsibility to create the type of space where everyone can coexist. Unless that space is there, you can have umpteenth regional organizations, and they're not going to work. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I now would like to use this opportunity to thank my panelists. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and appearing here and enlightening our audience. Thank you very much. Let's have a big round of applause.
Thank you, Dr. Zahid. Now, I would like to request Air Commodore Khalid Binuri to please present the panel with their souvenirs.
Yes, sir.
I did suspect this was going to happen, but I also took the liberty that since I haven't spoken, I should make a one-line comment. on this broader subject of strategic studies and the strategic culture. In this region, we do our hardcore security very well. We've assured that. That gives you space to do the other stuff, and maybe it's time to now go in that direction. The hardcore security side, the response to RSS, we do have a demonstration today of the RRS, the Rizwan, the Rubina, and the Salma. So I think they can go in that direction. Thank you very much.
Dr. Rizwan Saib. Dr. Salma Malik. Dr. Rubina Hussain. Dr. Zahid Mahmood Zahid. Thank you very much. We will now head towards quick refreshment. You are requested to return by 11:20 a.m. as the second session will reconvene at 11:25 a.m.
Just a small request. यहाँ जितने भी DSS के graduates हैं, क्या वो stage पे जमा हो सकते हैं? Answer, Fawad. We want to have a quick photo. DSS.
I request everyone to please settle down. Excuse me, I request everyone to please settle down. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I should do that.
We're just going to resume, so please, everybody take their seats.
फुल स्क्रीन किस तरह होगा, आइडिया है?
Welcome back, everyone. I am Mohammad Naman Mushtaq, and this is Kashmala Alam. We are students of BS fourth semester, and we welcome you all to the final session of our two-day international conference on developing indigenous South Asian epistemes for international relations and strategic studies. The last session is on the need for change, moving towards indigenous concepts and frameworks. Our moderator for this panel is Dr. Afsa Qazi. She serves as an assistant professor at the Department of Strategic Studies, Air University, Islamabad. Dr. Qazi holds a PhD in International Relations from School of International and Public Affairs, Jilin University, China, and an MSc and MPhil in the discipline from Qadim University, Islamabad. Her research has been published in local and foreign peer-reviewed journals. I request our moderator, Dr. Afsa Qazi, to take her seat on the panel. Allow us to briefly introduce our panelists for this last session. Meanwhile, the panelists are requested to proceed and take their seats on the stage. Our first speaker is Dr. Rabia Akhtar. Dr. Rabia is Director, Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research, University of Lahore. She is the founding director of the School of Integrated Social Sciences at University of Lahore, Pakistan. She is a non-resident senior fellow at the South Asia Center, Atlantic Council, Washington, D.C. Dr. Akhtar holds a PhD in security studies from Kansas State University. She is a Fulbright alumna and has written extensively on South Asian nuclear security and deterrence dynamics. She is the author of a book titled The Blind Eye, U.S. Nuclear Security and Deterrence Dynamics, The Blind Eye, U.S. Non-Proliferation Policy Towards Pakistan from Ford to Clinton. She will share her insights on the topic, Advocacy for a Paradigmatic Shift Towards Indigenous Conceptualizations of Strategic Studies.
And our next speaker is Dr. Zafar Hussain Jaspal. Dr. Jaspal is a professor. Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal. Dr. Jaspal is a professor and the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, where he teaches various aspects of international political and defense affairs, nuclear and missile proliferation, national security, and Pakistani foreign and strategic affairs. He holds a PhD in international relations. He is a well-published scholar both nationally and internationally. He has authored 3 books, the most recent one being Arms Control in South Asia, Politics, Postures, and Practices. Moreover, he regularly contributes to both electronic and print media. He will share his thoughts on the topic, recontextualization of key strategic studies concepts. And our final speaker is Dr. Taqir Hussain Sargana. He is a graduate of Bahauddin Zakriya University, Multan, Quaid-e-Azam University, International Christian University, Tokyo, Islamic University, Islamabad, and the University of North Carolina, USA. Dr. Sargana is serving as an assistant professor at the Department of Politics and International Relations, International Islamic University, Islamabad. He is also leading an apolitical and non-profitable association, Pakistan Association of International Relations, as a founding president and chief researcher. Dr. Sargana is also a Rotary World Peace Fellow. Dr. Sargana has been contributing as a resource person and instructor to National Security and War course at the National Defense University, Islamabad. He is an adjunct faculty at a number of prestigious policy institutions in Pakistan. Dr. Taqi will share his insights on the topic, strategies for fostering intellectual autonomy and cultivating homegrown frameworks for strategic studies. I now give the floor to our panel moderator. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Nawaz and Kashmala, for introducing the panel. I hope I'm audible to everyone. Good day, everyone. I realize that the conference has been intellectually exhausting exercise due to the intense theoretical and methodological debate that is being generated. Yet, seeing a good number of audience remaining engaged till this second panel of the second day is encouraging enough for us to carry forward this debate at other platforms and newer and diverse panels. This last session in the strategic studies component of the conference aims to deliberate upon if there is a need for change in our approach towards the discipline. And following an answer to this question of the need, it aims to identify the places where the change is most desired. Importantly, as the change cannot be a sweeping overnight process, our task here is to move towards a prioritization of the concepts and frameworks that are to be taken as areas of imminent concern and from where discursive efforts must begin. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The audience are requested to switch the phones to silent mode. For the speakers, we have 15 minutes each, followed by a 40 to 50 minutes Q&A session, where detailed insights over different questions can be shared. And as each of the respected panelists would near exhausting of their time limit, I would give them a soft reminder to wind up the talk. With this, I invite our first panelist, Dr. Rabia Akhtar. She will be talking about how advocacy for the paradigmatic shift that we are envisioning should proceed. And where does the role of advocacy stand in the overall challenging task of creating indigenous conceptualizations of strategic studies? The floor is yours, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Adil and the Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies for getting all of us together on this extremely important topic. And you and I, have been part of various conversations where we've been pushing for a South Asian approach to strategic studies, and your contributions in this field, need to be acknowledged, and I'm grateful for that. Along with so many other brilliant minds who are here, and a lot of learning has happened in the past 2 days. Setting the bar very high for this panel. It's really difficult to speak when Salma Malik has spoken, but we'll try. So what I've done is I've developed 3 comparative tables for you in order for you to understand as to how can we contextualize and situate this conversation. So the first comparative table of strategic thought that I've put here, it's not exhaustive, so please engage with it. You can use it further for your own analyses and research, and would be very happy to, add more to this table. So again, not an exhaustive list. So let's take a look at Western Cold War perspective and South Asian perspectives. Firstly, ideological foundations. We have seen the Cold War dominated by a bipolar worldview, and we had capitalism versus communism. And on the South Asian side, the ideological, foundations were influenced by colonial histories, as well as, non-alignment movement, regional conflicts that were not related directly to Cold War ideologies of capitalism or communism. With respect to nuclear weapons, during the Cold War, as we all are students of IR and history, stockpiling arms race as a symbol of power, the strategic dynamics between US and USSR. And when we look at the South Asian perspective, we have seen more restrained approaches with a focus on the no first use or Pakistan's full spectrum deterrence, leading to the thought of having minimal number of nuclear weapons, which would provide credible deterrence. With respect to deterrence philosophy, we have seen, a shift, a series of, thoughts that have been experimented with in the Cold War context, mutually assured destruction, flexible response, and a lot more. And we have seen the difference with the South Asian perspective is an emphasis on limited war, and crisis stability, recognizing the potential for escalation in regional conflict. We can have more discussion on it later. With respect to strategic postures, we have seen the Cold War posture as predominantly aggressive and expansive military postures, with countries even post-Cold War expanding their arsenals. And with respect to South Asia, we've seen defensive precautionary postures often aimed at balancing the power asymmetries in the region. With respect to security concerns, I realize that I have the ticker here, so I need to probably, move next. With respect to security concerns focused on global ideological supremacy and containment, that was the hallmark of the Cold War. And with the South Asian perspectives, we've seen this security concerns centered around regional security dynamics with that focus of historical disputes and need for autonomy in the IR domain. With respect to policy formulation, we have seen the context to be much more global, driven by global strategy influenced by superpower status. And in the South Asian context, again, it has been regional dynamics, historical grievances, and a need for strategic autonomy. Moving on to, can somebody move the slide for me, please? Sorry, yeah. With respect to military strategies, the Western strategic thought, centers around large-scale conventional and nuclear capabilities, whereas for South Asia, there's been a mix of conventional, asymmetric nuclear capabilities that have been tailored for regional threats and historical conflicts. Alliances and alignments were very clear-cut during the Cold War period based on the ideological lines, whereas these alignments are more fluid with respect to South Asian perspectives, given the non-aligned movement with the focus on maintaining strategic autonomy from global power and not doing the, squarely camp politics. Economic considerations were secondary to military and ideological strategies during the Cold War domain, whereas in the South Asian, we've seen an integral focus on as to how security policies impact economic development and human security, although this discourse is not as pronounced, but at least there are noises towards that. And obviously zero influence of colonialism, because obviously, the entire colonial discourse emanates from West and is Eurocentric. For South Asia, we have seen deeply ingrained impacts shaping national boundaries, regional disputes, and post-colonial state development. This leads me to talk about a distinctly South Asian approach to strategic studies on nuclear weapons. And for this, again, there are certain aspects of strategic thinking that I want you to think about, and then a South Asian approach versus a Western norms approach. So we have had, panelists before me and yesterday as well talked about historical and cultural context, historical legacies leaving deep, influences from conflict to colonization, emphasizing strategic autonomy. These cultural influences have been pronounced. I don't want you to think like a Pakistani right now when I talk about India's no first use, because I'm talking about a South Asian approach to it. And in that, I'm placing both India and Pakistan and their philosophies together versus the other them. So it's us right now versus them. So if you drop that truly strategic lens, probably you would be able to understand where I'm coming from. There are certain geopolitical realities. There are immediate threat perceptions that, strategy shaped by regional threats, notably India-Pakistan, India-China, Pakistan-China, India-US relations. And there are asymmetric warfare concerns. Again, doctrine and policy I've talked about earlier as well. We'll move to strategic stability and crisis management. We have looked at strategic stability conversations within Pakistani and Indian strategic studies discourses. We have looked at, escalation control, and, the role of third parties in managing crises as more pronounced in this, dyadic strategic sense. International norms and treaties, when it comes to that, our approach has been very selective due to the discriminatory nature of these treaties. The strategic studies discourse is quite reflective of as to how discriminatory the treaties is, and therefore selective participation. And then the security development nexus. And like I said, probably more work needs to be done on it. The guns versus butter debate, we do have it in Pakistan, but again, it is not an academic discourse. It is a discourse which is reduced to opinion pieces. We have seen people write about it, but we haven't had hardcore conferences on it as to whether, if your economy is in a nosedive, how do you continue to maintain arsenal and, stuff like that. But we can have larger conversation on it later. Lastly, it brings me to the topic of paradigmatic shift in South Asian strategic studies. And, as my fellow panelists, have alluded to it, do we really believe that there is going to be a shift in paradigm? Or are we going to just recenter or refocus these approaches that already exist? Is there going to be an indigenous theorization with respect to that? So I do believe that there is scope to move away from Western theoretical frameworks that already exist. And we need to explore as to how, how we can transform these foundational, theories and methodologies based on our own experiences. Then changing of epistemologies, I believe that embracing different ways of knowing that incorporate regional histories, cultural nuances, ethical considerations, all of this, which we have been talking about for the past 2 days, how can that be included in new knowledge that is being created? Then with respect to methodological diversity and innovation, are we in our universities looking at new or better, approaches to understand these? We can have a conversation on that. Impact on policy and practice, influencing how knowledge is used to inform policy and practice leads to strategies. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, again, we have discussed on this forum that there is a disconnect between the academics and the policy folks. And the academia practitioner divide is huge. Mostly in my own experience, it is because practitioners do not want to learn what academics have to offer. There is not much, open thinking or think experiments that are allowed freely to happen, even on our campuses and in our think tanks, which are known as think tanks. Very few think goes into that tank. Then there's the global, discourse participation. Where do we as South Asians find ourselves? Again, we have had this conversation that there are various forums where, such type of a conversation can happen. But when we go to conferences, are we presenting a unique South Asian perspective or not? That is something that you need to think about. I have a couple minutes left. So I will just briefly, tell you to think more loudly about constructivist realist perspectives. I know that, we are very fond of realism, but there are many approaches out there that don't take anything away from your realist perspective, but allows you to think broadly about, for example, enemy image. If you were to change, let's say, just thinking out loudly, if you were to change the enemy image today of India, and you were to, rewrite your history books and they were rewritten on the Indian side as well, what shape would your discourse take? How would that reshape strategic studies or even your IR, theoretical perspective? So this othering and the enemy image probably is something, a new approach that you can think about. This generation is not talking to their Indian counterparts, for example. There still is a generation who's sitting here who talks to the Indian counterparts at various track tours, but you do not have that opportunity to meet a peer. And therefore, the image that you carry in your head is the one that has been taught to you. So I think more people-to-people narratives, are going to change. Somebody said earlier that we are in the second Cold War. So I want you to challenge these notions as students. We all should push for it. Are we in the second Cold War just because there are pieces being published in your favorite newspapers or magazines that are telling you that there is a second Cold War? Please, just put first Cold War and second Cold War together and then look at the narratives that are being generated to feed the military-industrial complex. And, we can talk about that. One other thing that I want you to think loud about is, China's perspective on the world, or China's rise. China has, by the way, already risen, and we keep on saying that China's rise is imminent. These kind of narratives about China's assertiveness, you need to read the literature coming out from China in order to see as to where does that stand when the Western narratives against China are being propagated. Challenge scholars like Vipin Narang, pick your favorite scholar and deconstruct their arguments. Even if you love them to death, even if you think you don't have it in you to deconstruct them, find an argument, be critical in your thinking. Scholars have written that Pakistan's behavior as a smaller, weaker nuclear weapon state would lead Pakistan to use nuclear weapons early on in a crisis. And that was dismantled in the 2019 Balakot crisis. Very little acknowledgement of Pakistan's behavior the Western scholars are willing to give to us. So why don't we reclaim that space? It is you who need to deconstruct the literature that is coming from there. My own work on Pak-US relations, roller coaster ride, Pakistan's history, Brigadier Feroz is sitting here, a pioneer, in projecting as to how Machiavellian Pakistan's approach has been and how we have maneuvered through restricted spaces in Pakistan-US relations. We were a threshold nuclear weapon state when we were at the height of our alliance with the United States. How does that happen? It does not happen without, a full show of diplomatic, force that pushed Pakistan through a national consensus on nuclear weapons. So give the credit where due. I'll just lastly end on a brief quote by US Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who gave it in 2005. He said, "What is shocking is that today, more than a decade after the end of the Cold War, the basic US nuclear policy is unchanged. Of the 8,000 active or operational US warheads, 2,000 of them are on hair trigger alert, ready to be launched on 15 minutes warning. On any given day, as we go about our business, the president is prepared to make a decision within 20 minutes that could launch one of the most devastating weapons in the world. To declare war requires an act of Congress, but to launch a nuclear holocaust requires 20 minutes of deliberations by the president and his advisors." And these are the people who are telling you that you are the nuclear flashpoint. And how many of you and us have pushed against this point as to who is the most dangerous country in this world that has launched nuclear weapons and will launch nuclear weapons, and it is not India and Pakistan. I would rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabia Akhtar, for staying in time and for bringing up many thought-provoking ideas. And I'm glad that you have compared the global and the South Asian strategic thoughts. And you have also sort of given the components of what a distinctly South Asian approach to strategic studies would look like. I would now give the floor to our second panelist, Professor Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, who has an even difficult task to talk about the recontextualization of key strategic studies concepts. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. And let me start by saying that I'm pleased to Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Study here at University, and as well as Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for providing me this opportunity to speak on these very important topics. The most important thing is that I think that this is a very encouraging sign from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung that it is encouraging us to think, debate, and discuss certain things which need recontextualization, especially in the strategic domains. When I was reading the concept paper, on the basis of that, I partially agree with that concept paper, what they identified, the puzzle, and partially, or I have an alternative view. I cannot say disagree. So that's provoked me to start my paper with this. What is the episteme of the strategic studies? And the second part of my paper will be covering why recontextualization of key strategic studies concepts is required. And finally, how we can contextualize, whether we adopt a rejectionist approach or conformist approach. And finally, what are the challenges with which we are living? Another point which I would like to highlight here is that we have to live with this reality. Social scientists, whatever they write, whatever they speak, they are the product of their society. Similarly, strategists, they are product of their strategic environment, and they have to serve their state and society. And within that context, if somebody thinks if we can criticize something, if the state thinks that we are anti-state, that is wrong. And if somebody else thinks that it's a propaganda engineered by the state or by this, again, it's incorrect. So our critique or our observation shall be taken within a proper perspective. So having said this, when we look about the strategic studies, I think in the last panel and now also you have recognized that strategic studies emerged as a distinct field during the 1950s. The competitive deployment of nuclear weapons and discourse on strategic stability during the Cold War enriched its modern episteme. The end of the Cold War prompted a debate about the relevance of strategic studies. A famous scholar, John Baylis, wrote, strategic studies had been one of the dominant subfields in the study of international politics from the 1950s to the 1980s. But with the easing of East-West tension in the early 1990s, it became to be regarded by some as a Cold War subject, which was no longer relevant to the new developments taking place in the world politics. This he wrote in 2001. The rejectionists rightly identified that the strategic studies evolved as a separate discipline during the Cold War. However, they failed to realize the discipline grounded on the concepts and framework which had progressed since the emergence of birth of mankind. According to the Islamic theology and Hebrew Bible narrative, Prophet Adam's son Qabil killed his brother Habil out of jealousy. This is the basis of starting a conflict and how we trace the knowledge emerges. Marx concluded conflict is an unavoidable aspect of human nature. Sun Tzu wrote, the art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death. Wars have been an important and inevitable part of human history. Kotialya, who is now referred Chanakya, or what they call it Chanakya, it is considered by the Indians, their scholar, he is a product of Taxila, I think a few miles from here or Humayun's area. So maybe he has some kind of influences of that. So what he said, an enemy destruction shall be brought about even at the cost of great losses in men, material, and wealth. He wrote, whenever an enemy king is in a trouble and his subjects are exploited, oppressed, impoverished, and disunited, they should be immediately attacked after one proclamation of war. That we are seeing in the modern terminology, preventive war, preeminent war, or all these kind of things. Thus, the episteme of strategic study is primitive. The strategic philosophy by literature dating back to 2,500 years to the writings of Sun Tzu Art of War, Thucydides 460 BC of History of the Preparation War, Kutrialia is known very much Arthashastra, and volumes are available on detailed analysis of the war and peace strategies of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So since the emergence of strategic study as a separate academic discipline, its primary concerns remains the use of military muscle as an instrument of state policy in the global politics. Nevertheless, its focus has enlarged considerably. The phenomena, concepts, and issues like making of strategy, balance of power, security dilemma, role of nuclear weapons, deterrence theory, or these kind of the things, hybrid war, cyber war, construct the basis of the discipline even today. They are equally used in the strategic literature and making of strategy in South Asia. Strategic studies discipline originated in the West. The Western scholars such as Bernard Brodie, Colin S. Gray, etc., they contributed immensely in the concept of this discipline. They employed the Clausewitz approach significantly in their writings. These concepts have dominated the conceptualization and contextualization of strategic discourse in South Asia, despite the differences in the Western and South Asian strategic environment. The historical, cultural, and geographical constructs of various regions are not identical. Therefore, identical solutions are impractical. Conversely, we are living in the interconnected, interdependent global village. In such a situation, a complete rejectionist approach towards Western theories and approaches is not a rational or a realistic choice. Simultaneously, the complete compliance or conformity to the Western theories and approaches is senseless or bizarre. Despite this paradox, the strategic studies debate in South Asia is grounded on the Western classic realist paradigm and the Cold War era discourse. Therefore, it seems that the strategic discourse in South Asia is shaped by external or a Western paradigm and theoretical framework. The realistic approach is for the South Asian that one ought to understand the episteme of realpolitik or a power politics in the international relation, which is primarily interstate relation. This assists us in contextualizing of the key strategic studies concepts in South Asia. Realistically, the continuous reliance on Western-centric models and theories is not an erroneous approach in the nuclearized South Asia. However, the puzzle in disseminating a Western narrative is that it marginalizes the local voices and perspectives. Consequently, it encounters challenges in conceptualization and contextualization of the regional strategic environment, which is entirely different from the Cold War. For instance, in the Cold War, strategic competition was between the two superpowers. The South Asian strategic environment is dominated by the two regional strategic rivals, and the region is immensely influenced by the extra-regional strategic competitors. The strategic trilogy, China, India, and Pakistan, constructs the strategic environment of South Asia. So when we look about this thing, what we require the episteme of the strategy, starting from the strategos, and we require the understanding of the strategic studies. But what is happening? Let me now bring you why there's a need of contextualization. The famous term for us today is nuclear deterrence. When we look about the nuclear deterrence theory, it confronts the situation in South Asia that is very different from the context in which such theorization developed. And that was, if you see, the United States-Soviet Union confrontation during the Cold War. They don't have a common border. Though with the NATOization of the Europe, today you can say NATO has reached to the border of the Russia by Finlandization, after Finland. But we have a common border. The short missile flight times, limiting reaction time to almost nothing in the South Asia. We remember 4 wars and unlimited border skirmishes, perennial Kashmir dispute, active involvement in each other's intrastate conflicts, contesting regional and global outlook, and power asymmetry. These are a different situation strategically, and in that context, we have to contextualize the entire thing. For instance, Pakistan used the word full spectrum nuclear posture within our own environment to communicate the adversary. Maybe it was the product of the all rungs of the war. But we have to keep in mind this thing that how we can rationalize these posters or these things. Naturally, when we are looking about these posters and these things, we have to keep in mind what is the local literature and how it is produced. The important point in the literature is that we prefer, because of the research methodology or because of the printing or because of the quality of the production of the Western printers or perhaps Western publishers. But I can give you a very interesting example. Recently, I approached the Oxford, and the Oxford said, we stopped publishing or writing on the nuclear. It's too sensitive issue. Though the Oxford published earlier on the nuclear books in Pakistan. So why we were approaching the Routledge ready to publish, but Routledge book nobody can purchase here because it's too costly. Other book I have seen, it's too costly for the youngsters or for Pakistani, especially you can say where dollar is 300. So we need a local kind of an approach. Second important thing is, when we look about the strategic contextualization, Rabia gave a very interesting example of the 2019. Interestingly, in that case, a nuclear armed state adopted a compelling strategy, used a surgical strike against a nuclear armed state. It's a new dimension. It was not in the Cold War. It was in South Asia. I didn't see a major critical analysis of that. Yes, Feroz's book came after. I appreciate that. Maybe there are a few Pakistani writers contributed. Where is the American so-called nuclear ayatollahs, non-proliferation ayatollahs, debating that during a crisis, the nuclear armed state was struck by the nuclear armed state? How was it critical when they moved their nuclear assets for a deployment? This is a point. Where is our perspective? I will take it through 3 minutes. Now, in this context, this is the first thing which required how we contextualize the deterrence situation in South Asia. How there's a transformation. Today, I read an interesting small piece before coming. Author said that it was based on a CIPRI analysis. India, third military power in the world. Pakistan, 21st military power. But is there a strategic equilibrium? If you can go with the digit, no. But if you go on a strategic chessboard, yes. This is a requirement of the contextualization of these power asymmetries or these kind of the things. There's a third area in this context is when you contextualize these things, that how we perceive and how we think. I have no doubt to say, yes, some scholars, Pakistanis, are very successful in publishing in their Western houses or journals. For instance, in 2006, practical example, I encountered a review report of my article. They said, you have to admit or write tactical weapons, you can say increases the vulnerabilities. My case was tactical weapon or battlefield weapon decreases the vulnerability on the battlefield. And all the Western scholars, I think, Feroz recall in 2012, criticizing in one strategic dialogue, cursing the Pakistanis, why they went for Nasser. Why today, American strategic posture, which was released in October 2022, is advocating the miniaturization and tactical weapons. So if in their strategic environment something is correct, and if we write in our strategic environment is something incorrect for them, there comes the perspective, there comes the biases, there comes the social sciences contribution. So I appreciate the person who initiated this. We have to trace the Epstein. It's not only their strategies, not only their domain. Yes, modern terminology. We are in the third age of nuclear. In that, how we look the fabrication and integration of new emerging technologies in the military hardware, how we protect ourselves, how we interpret it. This is the requirement of the scholars, and this is the need we can publish in our areas, but there is a problem again. All the think tanks, government-funded think tanks, unfortunately, They are parking place of civil military retired bureaucrats. That also creates a trouble. We have to come out from these things. We have to create a new narrative. I am not against their academic qualification. They can come, they can do everywhere it is. They need a space, but there is a need to rationalize certain spaces. You have to promote the academics. Academics or research promoted in the universities. Think tanks only rehash and decision makers pick. What is happening in Pakistan? They pick a one word. Deterrence was not broken in 2019. Think tanks started debated, and when we academics tried to apply a theory on it, different narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. You just took 1 minute more than your designated time. And I'm thankful that you referred to the primitiveness of the episteme of strategic studies in the region and globally. And also you pointed out to the significance of critical junctures where the academia should contribute in the field. I would now move on to the last panelist, Dr. Tawqir Hussain Sargana, who gets to engage us with the methodological or the how to do it part of this broader debate. He will be pinpointing the strategies that are to be adopted for fostering intellectual autonomy in order to cultivate homegrown regional frameworks in the field of strategic studies. Over to you, Dr. Sargana.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afsa. My appreciation and gratitude to the Air University, especially the wonderful, outstanding, Dr. Adil Sultan, who has been successfully navigating between strategic studies and international relations from the bottom up to top down approach, bringing every perspective together. And I am also grateful to the FASS country director who has been, understanding the requirement of such debates and have provided opportunity to conduct this conference. Especially, I'm really grateful to the audience because without audience, no explanation is valid, neither any perspective is going to flourish. So I must appreciate the young minds, the shining minds who are the future. And this whole conference is not for us to come together and share our thoughts with each other. Rather, it is an effort to share the knowledge with you because you are the custodian of future. And being the custodian, you need to understand how indigenous epistemes are going to impact or have been impacting if they have not been properly understood. So with that, so I have to set the stage here. And when the world is experiencing an acute geopolitical conflict, any event is viewed exclusively through its prism. The United States versus Russia and China, India versus Pakistan, the West versus the rest, Islam versus Christianity, democracy versus autocracy, jihad versus backward, and so on. Accordingly, the conflict will always see a winner and a loser. Developing regions, South Asian epistemes for international relations and strategic studies of no exception, especially given that the contestation appears embedded in its composition. Dr. Rubina was, in her presentation, she referred Muhammad bin Qasim. It reminded me one of my experience in 2006 when one of UK-based organization was conducting interviews for scholarship, so I was candidate there. So one of the lady professor asked me, what do you think about Muhammad bin Qasim? So you can imagine what I would be saying. I just glorified him the way I was supposed to. And at the end, after 2.5 minutes, the lady professor got so much angry that she outbursted her thoughts and scrutinized me and bashed me in a way that I have to respond her, that lady professor, by God, I was not born at that time. What Muhammad bin Qasim has done, I just read in books and told by my teachers. So that is a time when I can recall that indigenous epistemes, how important they are. But of course, that was not the time when I was realizing in accurate academic terms, but somehow it was
moving around me. And strategic studies is a discipline where we work together, and there are a lot of brilliant people around us who have contributed a lot, but that contribution somehow have, overburdened the very justification of our local issues. We have been westernized in perspective, and that those perspectives are always trying to convince us that the local understanding is not sellable, and rightly pointed out by Dr. Spala as well. The certain reputed publishers are even not able to accept the perspective that we have. So the topic which I am dealing today, it again requires the audience which is a future custodian. So I would like to bring your attention to this particular talk of 12 to 15 minutes that I have left. So your concentration is very important because my communication would be directly with you. The heavy strategic understanding has already been deliberated by my seniors, so I would be just talking to you right now. So please stay with me for 10 more minutes or 12 more minutes so that we can finish. And 3 minutes have already been taken by, Hafsa on this way. What shapes our academic understanding is an outline that I have just given over here. Sorry. So I will spend 1 minute on each. There are multiple factors which are going to influence, what shapes academic understanding. There are internal factors, there are external factors, there are cognitive abilities, there are prior knowledge, individual learning, which influences our understanding. There are social norms, cultural values, education systems, and access to resources that also shape our understanding. The question, what makes academic understanding subject to bias is, of course, something societal biases stemming from culture, norms, historical context, power dynamics. They all can influence the creation, dissemination, acceptance of knowledge. So we have to be very careful in dealing with these things. Do we have examples in academic literature that specifically highlights biases in shaping the indigenous epistemes? For example, 2 publications have been very important for me whenever I study the discourse of international relations. The Clash of Civilization by Huntington. It is a document which always, rule out the possibility of interdependence and integration in a way that he proposes in his thesis, that the nations are not going to fight with each other. It's the cultures which are going to fight. The same very way I came across with another book, which was about jihad versus backward in 1995. That book also talks about that there is a vested, inherited conflict of disorientation between the jihad, which is referring to Islamic societies, versus the Mac world, which is the industrialized and developed societies. So these texts provided me to, in reference to 9/11 and all these explanations, I realized that, nations resort at the earliest stage or at the initial stage in ideas before ending up into physical conflict. If nations fail to address, those opponent ideas or the values which are shaping your identity or redefining your culture, if you fail to address them within the domain of scholarship, the second stage is ultimately, inevitably, the physical assault. And that, if you study the literature during that time period, 90s and after in the 21st century, you will find out that it is a case which is much logical, rational, and objective if the premise is going to be investigated scientifically. So in that way, the strategic studies response has to be very accurate and appropriate in terms of dealing with that. Let me come up with an analogy. For example, there are generations of warfare. For example, we know that Clausewitz has already said that, war is a continuation of politics by other means. So it means the end is political objective. That political objective, whenever war is there, you will always be looking towards the political objective. If you look into the ancient era to end of 30 years, you will find out that territorial expansion, consolidation of power, assertion of dominance over rival states of empires was the core political objective of that warfare. Many nations, I'm not talking about the post-Westphalian modern nation states, but I'm referring to the nations at that time, communities at that time, the empires of that time. Some of them survived, few of them not. If you go to the first generation warfare, you will find that in that warfare, control of strategic resources, national identity, state sovereignty were the core political objectives. As the end of that first generation warfare, few nations survived, few did not. If you go to the third generation or second generation warfare, you will be feeling or concluding the same spirit. Few survived and few not. If you go to the third generation and fourth generation, which is more guerrilla warfare, non-conventional, sub-conventional warfare, you come up to the fifth generation warfare. Down the stream, many nations failed to survive, and many did survive. So that survival aided the passage towards their sustainability in a way that we need to understand with an analogy again. If I tell you and ask you, if there is a tree and I cut the branch of that tree, do you think that that tree would be having fruits next year, next season? What would be your response? Yes, because one branch, if you cut it, the next season, the tree will flourish again. If you cut two branches of the tree, do you think next season the tree will flourish or not? It will continue to flourish. If you even cut the trunk of the tree in the next season, the tree will come again and flourish. But if I say, if you cut the roots of the tree, do you think the tree is going to give you fruits again? No. If I have to present you state as a tree and ask you, what are the roots of that state? The youth. It's you. So in 21st century, the dimension of warfare has taken to hybrid and non-kinetic domain where strategic studies has to respond through indigenous epistemes that should allow to counter such narratives and misperceptions which are taken over the nations in the 21st century. Another, issue that, is the imposition of strategic discourse on South Asian framework. Due to colonialism, we can, debate that the influence of colonialism does have impacted on South Asian, epistemology and understanding of different aspects of their local issues. But there is another aspect of Western education where Western educated scholars have deliberately continued to deny the local epistemes. And due to that factor, the local epistemes are unable to flourish and get recognition. And Dr. Jaspal has already talked about think tanks that, it's a parking place for the retired civil and military officers who are again not allowing local epistemes to get flourish. Another aspect is deductive or inductive approach. For example, if you study the literature of South Asia strategic studies, mostly the literature is produced through deductive reasoning, which means application of already established theories, and the hypotheses have been already taken by the literature. Rather, using inductive approach, which allows you to generate theories and hypotheses, which allows you to formulate theories and hypotheses. Because at the end result of the inductive domain, you're going to give something new in perspective and contribution into the knowledge. So I have seen that in literature of South Asia, the deductive domain is more prominent. There have been a lot of efforts done to mitigate this issue. we have to be very careful between rhetoric and reality, which was again yesterday referred by the country director, FES. And this rhetoric versus reality is again a challenge where rhetoric is defining the reality, whereas reality is being undermined in mainstream geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions of South Asia particularly. We have to be, we can take example of global South versus global North, because BRICS at the moment is being referred a voice of the global South. It is being referred as a multipolarity rather than that one world system which was, promulgated in the aftermath of Second World War. So if we see global South at the moment, it is more powerful than the G7 countries economically speaking. It is a country, it is a region which has recently included 6 more countries into its membership. As one of the South African ambassador to BRICS has said that 40 more countries are, they want to join BRICS. 20 countries have formally submitted the letter that they want to join that. So you can see how Global South is going to represent the indigenous Epistemes in future. There could be challenges to convergence between Global South and Global North, but I believe there are no differences within Global South. So if global and the biggest center of Global South becomes South Asia. So if we invest on these perspectives through these conferences, through producing research, encouraging those researchers to publish their researches, I see the future of South Asia as the leading region in the Global South, which is the future of the economic world. So with these, explanations, I would like to conclude my talk and say you that nations engage in war of ideas before resorting to physical warfare. The failure to address and rebut hostile narratives within scholarly discourse will leave nations vulnerable to external aggression, both politically and militarily. So, ladies and gentlemen, nations survive due to intellectual autonomy. The ones who fail to achieve their future is futile. Within this plea and perspective, you all become the custodians of developing indigenous South Asian epistemes. Why? Because nations are built in classrooms, they are destroyed in classrooms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sargana, for staying well within time and for emphasizing the significance of the influence of biases and how to cut them as we move towards shaping our indigenous discourses. I would now head towards the Q&A session. Those interested in asking questions are requested to stand up and queue up against the mics placed in the arrays. And please introduce yourself while asking the question, identify the person who your question is directed at, and please be brief. Otherwise, I'll have to cut you down because we're already short on time. And now I'll give the first opportunity of asking question to the 2 seniors in the first row, moving ahead with Air Commodore Khalid Bunuri and then with Ambassador Sowedi. Can you please give the mic to Khalid Bunuri Saab? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Couple of quick comments, if you allow, Madam Chair. There were references, so I thought I'll just bring in, complete the picture in some ways. Interesting that Rabia mentioned Bob McNamara and his frustration about how the American policy hasn't changed. Recall that in January 2002, the Pakistani and the Indian forces were supposedly eyeball to eyeball, and there was a Pugwash conference in Lahore in which Bob McNamara came. He was late 80s years of age at that time, and repeatedly spoke one sentence: please learn from our mistakes. So perhaps the constructivism comes late in life, but that is the kind of message he had. That kind of frustration was visible in that. So I thought I'll mention that point. And I also, my dear friend Jaspal and also Tokir, kind of reinforced the same idea about the retirees or the practitioners being in this business for a long time, they are absolutely right. When we started this, let me just contextualize and acknowledge two people who are sitting here in the audience. The way Munis Amr started with talking about South Asia in general, in this context of strategic studies, Feroz Hassan Khan, he's already here, started in this context of strategic studies. And we realized at the beginning, this was around the year 2000, when generally the young people in the universities and the final year stages were interested in development studies because that's where the money was, the NGO money, right? The security studies didn't really have money and all. And we thought that now that this country has nuclear weapons, there's a need for the next generations to start thinking about these issues. So there was, and we started to provide arms control knowledge to the university through courses, through lectures. It was a cautious effort. I can tell you, Feroz started this, you can ask him. And I was honored to be part of that process and to carry this forward, to keep it, provide the Pakistani perspective, but keep it in a neutral sense so that people could make their own assumptions and develop their own understanding. And we were happy to note that in about 10 years, there were people who were pursuing PhDs. They'd never been in the government. That process has evolved further. So while those frustrations are absolutely true, and also true that some of those former practitioners late in life become constructivists, which is also true. But the fact is that there is new thinking. It needs to expand more. One last point to also mention is the Western world in general also realized that this was happening. They took a few years to actually understand this, and then started to lure several of our young people through more exposure to the Western point of view. Some went that way, and we never had a problem with that. What we thought on track one was that people need to start thinking about these issues. So I think now several people who have done PhDs, who have published books on nuclear issues, have published their independent views. May this grow further. Thank you very much.
Please give the mic to Ambassador Soweidi.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, one for Dr. Ravia Akhtar. While talking about the nuclear doctrine, you talked about the mutually assured deterrence, destruction, and also the limited warfare. We do appreciate that under the nuclear umbrella, whatever happened in South Asia have been very much limited warfare. Not only in 2019, also when we talk about 1999 Kargil war, there was no horizontal escalation, a little vertical escalation, but no horizontal escalation. But what I feel is that, if I am wrong, correct me, the first limited war under the nuclear umbrella was fought in Korea in 1940s. So limited warfare is not be a South Asian innovation. That's what I want to say. And my second question is to Dr. Sargana. When you talked about the expansion of BRICS, I was also observing it very keenly. And to be very honest, not because I'm in Islamabad, when I read the news of expansion of BRICS in October 2023, the first thing is that I searched for the name of Pakistan heritage. And very interestingly, the expansion has stopped abruptly at the western frontier of Pakistan. Why, we all can imagine. What my fear is that if the BRICS goes on expanding, and there are this exclusive criteria that who will be the new BRIC member, the other countries who are left, there is a danger that they will be the South of Global South. In that sense, and now I have the fear is that BRIC is becoming another G7 for us. Thank you.
We'll take two more questions for this round. Raiba, go ahead, please.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Laba from BS 5th semester, Air University. So my question is open to the panel. Is decolonialization and development of indigenous epistemes possible through colonial devices and structures of oppressions like English language, developmentalism, and political structures like nation state, etc.? Thank you.
The gentleman on the right, please. I think the mic is not working.
My name is Dawood. I'm a student of English linguistics. I'm a scholar. Basically, I was interested in this domain of IR and strategic studies. So I wanted to learn one thing. My question is for Dr. Rabi Akhtar. How do you see the relationship between the indigenous conceptualization of strategy and border issues of sovereignty and self-determination? How do you see the relationship between indigenous conceptualization of strategy and border issues of sovereignty and self-determination?
Okay, I think for this round, these number of questions are enough. Dr. Rabia, would you like to go first with the responses?
Yeah, sure. My first, response to limited war. So I did not say that, there was no experimentation with limited war in the Western strategic space. Obviously, United States had nuclear weapons. Soviet Union had caught up by the time Korean War had started. So whatever was happening, in Korea at that time was under the nuclear umbrella. But with respect to South Asia, specific to South Asia, the strategic scene from Kargil 1999 up till 2019, we have seen both countries experimenting with the subconventional space where they actively engage in conflict and push each other's thresholds to see, where is the tipping point before the third party comes in. And that's my understanding of how this space, which is very dangerous because neither India nor Pakistan know as to, whether any one of them will ever have dominance, escalation dominance, right? So I'm not saying that experimentation was not there, but the Western strategic thought moved very quickly, from massive retaliation to flexible response to mutually assured destruction over a period of years. But we have found this space under the nuclear umbrella, and our crises tell you that the experimentation is still on. It's we have not, even though it's a dangerous space, we have not given up the idea that limited force can be fought. They can't be won, nobody's sure, but they can still be fought because, we continue to exhibit that behavior. I'm not sure if I understand the question really well, and my apologies for that, as to sovereignty and self.
Yeah, I think he wants you to comment on the border issues of sovereignty and self-determination and how do we relate it to our strategy. That's what I understood out of that. Like, what is our strategy related to the border issues we are facing in terms of sovereignty and self-determination of the Kashmiris? That's what I think he means.
I would just simply, where are you sitting here? So I would just simply say that your nuclear weapons cannot win you Kashmir. Period. That's the relationship between strategy, when it comes to border issues and sovereignties. That's a domain where, you see the limit of nuclear weapons. Probably we can, have a longer conversation. My apologies for not understanding the question correctly. And lastly, to Laiba, who asked about English language, and I missed your last part. You said about English language, how can we have this conversation? And what was the part about political structures? Nation states. So with respect to English language, this entire discourse is about decolonization. And unfortunately, all of us speaking here, well, out of respect for foreigners who are sitting here, and probably we cannot have this in full Urdu discourse, but we also have no Urdu medium of instruction with respect to strategic studies or IR in our universities, right? All our books, all our articles are for the consumption of the Western audience. So whatever little thinking which is indigenous cannot come in English language. And that is why probably you don't see Pakistanis building theories, because they're just all the time trying to consume this knowledge that is already out there in English, and they're trying to just adjust their thoughts. They're dreaming in English, they're speaking in English, they're thinking in English, and none of us are encouraging this conversation. So we cannot have indigenous thought unless and until we go back to our roots, where an ordinary Pakistani understands what does it mean to have nuclear weapons, what does it mean to be a responsible nuclear weapon state, and so on and so forth. So I'll just stop there.
Dr. Sargana, your quick response, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Prakash, for asking this question. Actually, a global south perspective that we have just explained, that it is going to become a monopoly within the global south. We have to look into the progress of BRICS. For example, in 2009, this was established as BRIC: Brazil, Russia, India, China. Then in 2010, it became BRICS with the inclusion of South Africa. But if we see right now, 6 countries have been given membership from January 2024. And in that, we see African countries like Egypt and Ethiopia, Argentina from the Latin America, and 3 Middle Eastern countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. If you look into the economic, or let's say demographic and population-wise, there is a 3.5 billion, people residing in these, countries, and about 40% inhabitants are there. If you look into economic terms, $28.5 trillion the economy belongs to BRICS now. 20% of the global, economy. I told you as 31.7%, of global GDP is having overtaken by the G7, where the United States of America is also a member of that. So if you look into these developments, we have an optimistic perspective that it would expand. Of course, there will be challenges. The way you have already identified that there is exclusive criteria within the global south. Of course, there is no membership criteria. There is a consensus. For example, if Pakistan wants to enter into that BRICS, India is already a member there, so it has to sanction it. It has to say yes to it. If they don't say that, no one is going to allow Pakistan to get inside. There are some issues within BRICS, but the way it is expanding, the way it is mobilizing the world under, multipolarity and multilateralism concept, that is the challenge for the Western dominance, because the post-Second World War world order is very inclusive within the domain of P5. So Global South has given a voice. Of course, there will be challenges of inclusion or some other things, but of course, the voice collide in such a way that the majority come close to it. For example, there is a phenomenon of containment of China. It could be an issue for the West, but not the rest. The reason is, if you see into BRI, 140 countries are engaging with China and BRI. So 140 out of 193, let's say, total member states of the United Nations, 140 are over there. We have Africa, 54 countries. 52 countries are engaging with China, single, standalone. Only 2 countries are not doing that. So that global South's, orientation within the bigger domain of geopolitics and geoeconomics has, I believe, taken outstanding discourse to a level where cooperation, integration, like yesterday we were talking about commonalities, similarities, togetherness, oneness. The Global South is the future epicenter of that. And through this conferences like this, where a very timely, innovative, outstanding connection within the domain of episteme. And I said, South Asia is the future crown of Global South.
Thank you very
much. That
much,
is very
Dr.
important,
Sargana.
and it will be fruitful.
I think Dr. Jaspal has a quick comment to make.
I think that there are 3 points which I want to quickly. When we talk about sovereignty, it's a contested concept. It's a theoretical. But practically, of course, for sovereignty, you need a sovereign defense. And for sovereign defense, you need a sovereign economy and sovereign intellect. Second point, when we look about this language, yes, we read, write, it's an international language. I think that instead of wasting a time on it, we can focus more on the other things. In strategic studies or in any kind of evolution of a disciplines, why there is a change in thinking, especially, let me give you an example. When new technology comes, then you get a new name, new terminology, and then you construct your thought. The problem in this case is that we are borrowing the technologies. We speak that too much about indigenization. Where is evolution of the technology in the country? If I invent something, I give it my name, I give it my characteristic, I give it my thought. This is the way, this is a reality. Simply Supreme Court's issuing that you can write everything in Urdu language, it doesn't make any sense. So that's why I said the thinking process at the state level or at the institutional level, that is very much based on statism. No, thoughts have a different final word from episteme reminding. During the Chanakya's time, when he defeated the Greeks, he sent a delegation to the Greeks that I needed three things. First, silk, silky clothes. Second, wine. And third, your scholar. They responded that we can export you and you benefit maybe from silk and the wine you enjoy. You have to create your indigenous scholar. And that's the space where the Chanakya or Kautilya emerges. Thank you.
I think this will be the last round of questions, and I will have to very discreetly choose who I give the floor to because we are short on time. So I'll first go on. I'll give the privilege to Ms. Aiza, then Ms. Anam Khan in the fourth row, then the first boy on my left, and the first person on my right. Okay, so Ms. Aiza, you go first.
Please forgive me and take my comments positively and not negatively. With regards to what Banuri Saab mentioned earlier and the absolutely important work done after we became a nuclear power to try to equip us and make us more knowledgeable about this subject, this was essentially important work. But it seems to me that the generations that followed those foundations have lost track of that objective. Because what we see now is that even talking or discussing about these topics is something where we are very much kept in very strict and very narrow lanes. And while I do understand the importance of certain areas which should not be touched upon or should not be touched upon in certain contexts, that is essential and that is something to be understood. But my question possibly I'm going to just leave it open, whoever wishes to answer it. Why is it so important for us to not talk about certain no-go areas? Isn't that the entire objective? Until and unless we start talking about them, we cannot educate ourselves and we cannot respond to others who are picking up the narrative and distorting it on our behalf. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hamza Khan, BSIR second semester. My question is directed toward Dr. Rabia. My question is how strategic studies be reframed to encompass the long-term well-being of people and environment, considering the ethical implication of traditional approaches compared to indigenous framework that emphasize harmony, reciprocity, and sustainability. Yes. My question. Yes. Yes. How strategic studies be reframed to encompass the long-term well-being of people and environment?
Assalamualaikum everyone, and thank you very much for this awesome discussion. It is very well needed. I have two quick questions. I'll try to be quick. One is that nowadays the hush word is about sole purpose nuclear doctrine. So do you see Pakistan adapting such a thing in the future, because we're very clear about why we have these weapons. So it is open to the panel. And secondly, and that also means that do we need to have a lot more debate to construct or deconstruct this idea? Secondly, how do you see the impact of emerging technologies on a short second strike capability? Because you already told me a few things, but then again, I'm asking because there are complacents, there are alarmists, and then there are ballisters who think that we would have a certain impact on this. I'm also asking because we are still debating if Pakistan should opt for SSBNs or not. So,
thank you, Ms. Anam. Yes, Jabbar sir.
I'm Abdul Jabbar from PhD 2, Air University. My question is to Dr. Tawqir Sardana. You referred to Muhammad bin Qasim. Now, that's a construct that we have, and probably in last 70 years, we have strengthened it. Now, how to deconstruct it? This problem lies on both sides of the border. It's not with Pakistan only. So that is something that we have to have an agenda to resolve this, because before Muhammad bin Qasim, we have common history. After that, there's a wide debate. So how to resolve that? What's the way forward? Thank you.
Before you start responding, there's another question from Alizia Jaffrey directed to Dr. Tawqir Sardana. The question is, who, in your opinion, is a modern-day Clausewitz, and what is the current relationship between war and political ends? Who would like to respond first? Dr. Rabia?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I'll just speak to what Isa has just said. So Isa, there are no no-go areas, period. The state in every country is going to tell its citizens that there are certain domains in which only, their voice and their doctrine and their policies are going to be flourishing. Us as academics need to reclaim some of that space. And I'll just give you a very short example of the project that I did on nuclear responsibilities, where we experimented with the framework, which was constructivist realist, and we were just going to decode and deconstruct what are Pakistan's responsibilities, nuclear responsibilities towards the region, the non-nuclear states in the region. What is state's responsibility towards its citizens regarding a nuclear discourse? And obviously, there were roadblocks to doing that project and having access to people who actually do make policy on this, right? But the thing is not to be deterred, reclaim your space and push boundaries, because as academics, if you are not thinking, regardless of who's consuming what you are writing, it doesn't matter. You need to write for these people sitting here. You need to write for your students. You need to write for the next generation. And that's the responsibility that we need to take upon ourselves. So to my mind, there is no turf issue. We all can happily be married in this nuclear space, right? So it's just an idea of like, reclaim your space. If somebody tells you, I'm sorry, you cannot go there, please go there. Because that's where you're needed. That's where your thought processes are needed. I wish we could set up a crazy mind lab in which we could just enter and do crazy thinking, which doesn't make any sense, with no holds barred, right? And who's stopping us from doing that? Who's stopping us from coming together and doing it? So reclaim your space. Please don't give it up so easily if somebody says, sorry, this is my turf, my rules, my house, and you cannot work here. So don't do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would also like to respond to Dr. Isa. I need to tell you one thing, because we do not have, National Curriculum Revision Committee of Strategic Studies as well. It's a discipline which is flourishing since 1950s. We have very dynamic Dr. Zafar Jaswal is member of that. I am also a member of secretary of that committee as well since last 13 years. But we have International Relations Committee, we have Political Science Committee, we have Peace and Conflict Studies Committee. But we don't have national level, curriculum which should be taught and what is needed for the research of the national level in strategic studies. So I think Dr. Jaswal should be, and I should be working along with HEC to do that. So that's the problem, that it is not been academically even given some repute to so that the degrees and the curriculum should be managed. Abdul Jabbar, sir, God, sir, I was not born at that time, so I again don't know that what Mohammed Qasim has been doing at that time. I have already referred to a lady professor. I know her name, but I no longer refer as a under the ethics. Indians, yes, I have been able to talk to Indians as well when I was studying abroad. So they have been very, critical to these heroes that we have been making in our part of the world. That does not mean they are heroes, because we live in the domain of social sciences, and social science is not an exact science. That we aim always high, and we try to logically construct even personalities, cognitive issues, so cognitive domains. So I believe Mohammed Qasim is not that too brutal in perspective that we should be actually running after him. But somehow there are a lot of things within 21st century, not going South Sabara, 712. Even in 21st century, we have been not, frankly speaking, we are not being honest with our own generations. We have placed so many things which should not be in curriculum. But that's the duty of the policymakers and academicians have been highlighting that. India is actually terribly taken over by this. If you go and look at the curriculum in the Gujarat, Dr. Moni Samar has more knowledge and expertise on that. I'm just referring for the sake of reference. So their school curriculum has been changed. The Mussolini, the Hitler have been idolized, and they're still being taught there. So the kind of generation their schools are producing, you can see that. But I don't want that our generation should be produced on the same way. So there is some critical understanding.
Question, please.
So the last question is from Ali Zia Jafri, who is asking from Montreal, that who is a modern classmate? Again, I'm not, but somehow if I have to find a classmate in the modern literature, Dr. Deswal is, but he is. For us, he is a Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. But I can refer Ali to one book, for example, The Utility of Force. I read that book, and that book was published in 2008. And the book is written by General Retired Sir Rupert Smith. And he has been talking about sub-conventional warfare. And he is known as actually a modern 21st century Clausewitz. So if you want a reference from my side, I actually... yes, I consider him a Clausewitz, because when I read him, and I used this analogy in my PhD thesis as well, because he was of the opinion, even with the icons of warfare, France was unable to fight sub-conventional warfare. United States is unable to fight sub-conventional warfare. Russia is unable to fight sub-conventional warfare. And when I took that analogy and applied in context to Pakistan's experience in the aftermath of 9/11, the way Pakistan armed forces have fought 21st century warfare, I found that Pakistan army stands at the top and the only army which has fought sub-conventional warfare with all its due merit and in terms of expertise.
Thank you very much, Dr. I'll have to cut you here. I don't have an option. Dr. Jasper, your quick response to Ms. Anam's question.
Okay, quick response, and thank you very much. I hate to differ what the comment was made by Khalid. Let me elaborate it. When I talked about, I didn't, you can say, ignore. I am very much aware the way the process started and contribution started by the state, by the few individuals, Feroz, Salek, you, educating us, providing a space for learning. Second point is, when I was referring back parking place, please see the data. All CIS institutions, Institute of Strategic Study, Institute of Regional Study, they are funded by the government. There shall be a balance. That was my point, but I am not against the civil military bureaucrats. If they are contributing, Salek is doing excellent at the SPI academically. Feroz contributed. So it's not a domain of the civilian academics. It's also a domain of the everyone. But I'm just saying that there's a need to revisit. Even your Air Force has created a mega think tank. Who are they? So that is a question mark. Let me coming back towards the questions which were raised. First, strategic study and human security linkages, very strong linkages. Security study, a discipline which emerges in the 70s onward from the strategic studies. And debate started wider conceptualization and narrow conceptualization of the security strategy. Then you have seen Copenhagen School, you have seen Welsh School, you have seen the Paris School, you have seen the others. They started looking at the development studies, but of course, strategic studies also talk about, mainly strategic studies is a product of the strategic stability, coining the term, how to maintain a strategic stability. And strategic stability is always for a securitization or for a, stabilization, sorry. So that's why there is a very strong linkages. Then similarly, there was another question which Ravi has asked me that also I respond with this is that when we look about the second strike capability, new emerging technologies, where the discourse, according to the third nuclear age, according to the Andrew Footer writing, that new emerging technologies have been transforming the military power in a manner that you would be having a non-nuclear strategic weapons because of the fabrication and integration of the new emerging technologies. New emerging technologies, or especially like cyber or AI, they are creating a lot of challenges. But of course, man is behind. Without the man, nothing can move. And then comes the first strike and second strike. It's a Western term during the Cold War coined, but when we contextualize in the South Asia, let's say, put me how they contextualize. First strike, do you have an entire capability to decapitate the adversary? Otherwise, it's not a first strike, it's a preemptive strike. Now, in this context, in South Asia, no one has a first strike capability in this context. In our context, because we have a different geography, we have a different kind of things. Second strike, in that context, are different. Here, a few retaliatory strikes makes Pakistan will be evaporate. India will be dysfunctional. So we have to construct how we perceive. And then Europe has a different history. During the First World War, Second World War, they butchered. Read the first emerging literature on which became the basis of the IR. The writer wrote, Europe is mad. When he saw this battle and French and German, you can say, he wrote, Europe is mad. Entire world is mad. Now, C-65, 71, we did not attack on the cities. We are civilized in that manner, even in the war, whether somebody likes it or not. It's a way of perspective. It's a way of deconstructing. But anyway, when we look about these things, of course, these terminologies require decontextualization and re-understanding. My final word. Everyone knows the Machiavelli here. He himself said, I'm a child of Renaissance. If you read Kotialia or if you read Ibn Tusi, they were practitioner and real scholar. So he was himself a child of Renaissance, and we still right because the language dominated. That's why we need to study our language, our histories also. Everyone, no one here Pakistani can give your students cannot give a reference of either Sultan book or a Rose book or a Professor Munus wrote a lot, his books, Rabia's book, the Chris Smith, XYZ. So that's the reader. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, we end this second session of day 2. I'm thankful to all the speakers for coming here, especially thanks to Dr. Rabi Akhtar for coming all the way from Lahore, staying 2 days for the conference, and for all the speakers who have spared their time for 2 whole days and who have joined us. Just a concluding thought. So with this debate, we can conclude that the need for change is definitely there. And that is itself admitted by the Western scholars when they agree that the fundamental concept at the core of strategic studies, the concept of security is a contested one. Saying so means that the West also knows that their processes of signification are incoherent to our local peculiarities. And the task for us then is not only to ensure discursive formulation and dissemination of a regional episteme, but to engage the West even more via communicative action, since speech is the universal action that unifies all. And only like this, the differences can be worked out. Thank you so much. And I hand over the
Thank you, Dr. Afsa. Now I would like to request Brigadier Retired Feroz Hassan Khan to please come to the stage to present their panelists with their souvenirs. Dr. Rabia Akhtar. Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaswal. Dr. Taqir Hussain Sardana. Dr. Afsa Kazi. Now I request Brigadier Retired Feroz Hassan Khan to share his views with the audience.
So a slight change in the program. Brigadier Feroz is somebody who has worked on studies issues for a long time, lifetime. We have all learned from his writings, from his talks. So I thought we should use this opportunity to listen to him. I understand the time is very short, so I'll just request him 3 to 4 minutes if he can share his views, maybe about the sessions or maybe about how he feels about indigenization of strategic studies in South Asia. Sir, Brigadier Feroz.
And Yale University and all, sorry, my voice is down. Thank you so much. I'm really honored, and I was not totally expecting this to be on the spot here. It will be very unfair for me to make a wholesome comment because I did not attend the whole conference. But whatever I heard, I just make a few words, one or two observations, particularly that was made here. To begin with, when I was coming here, I'm still figuring out, unless you have, because again, it's unfair for me to say this. Is there a controversy between the Western way of thinking and the way things evolve here? What is it? Where is the controversy here? Which is why this issue, what's the issue here? And I'm trying to grapple the issue that it doesn't seem to come across that there is an issue. Whatever I could gather from the discussion that short while is that there is a voice from here that is probably not heard in the word or is not understood in the word. Is that right, Rabia? Am I? If that is the issue, yeah. Or is it the reason I'm saying this is that because I'm pointing to Rabia that she and I were at a particular place where this issue was discussed at length. And you remember, I'm referring to Stanford University in the presence of George Schultz and Bill Perry and others, where we were talking about Pakistani students, and Dr. Ishrat Hussain was present there. You recall that discussion? And this was precisely the discussion that our voice is not heard, and number of students in America are not being given granted because Indians are preferred over and so on and so forth. And one of the outcome of that was, and this is the university, so I say this with tongue in cheek, that some of the other, those kids would not be able to qualify the standard in the classic Ivy League university. They'll drop out compared to the kind of students that would come from Mumbai or Madras or Bangalore and other things, And what was the reason for that? Was that a question that they had an indigenous school of thought, or was it that the quality was there, I'll stop here. You understand what I'm saying here, that there is a reason for that. And it was so exciting that you actually have thought about doing this particular topic here, because the literal translation of this epistemology comes from the very Western thought of Aristotle way of thinking that was called, I think, justified true belief system, which means that if you have a true belief system, you must rationally, scientifically think through that this is there or not, rather than start believing in the superstitious and traditional and other way of thinking. And that's the essential difference between a Western literature processes And sometimes the processes that get lost here. Each one of you actually use the same tool. So if you have similar tools of analysis, all you need to do is the voice of that. And I'm only going to say one word because very kindly, Khalid Baroudi had mentioned something, and you also mentioned. It's enlightening to me to see that at the time when he was referring to the post-nuclear age, we did not have this audience to even understand one word of at the time. Today, we have all you people talking about this issue. You did not know anything about it. And there was a reason behind it. Dr. Ahmed, you remember that in the pre-nuclear test age, there was no literature in Pakistan or India for that matter that even acknowledged you are a nuclear weapon power. So not much about strategic thought was very different in the pre-nuclear age. It started prior to that because both countries were in a state of denial that you are not even having nuclear weapons. So there was nothing about nuclear strategy. There was nothing about arms control. Those lingos were not present there. And that's what I think Air Commander Banuri is actually referring, that we had to open up so that people get to know that now you're a declared open power and now the world is open to you now. Today, at that time, you would still sit in a library, look into something. There was no, you don't have a cell phone in your hand. There was no Uncle Google there at the time. You can see how difficult it was to open up the literature, and you are exactly doing what it is. One final word, because eating grass was mentioned here, and I want to say this because I'll probably not say that again here. Eating grass became a very big bang of a book because it was written by a Pakistani author, not by a Western author. Because it has a voice of a Pakistani voice, it was a voice of and not a Western voice. And I can, yeah, you can clap that, but the truth, because it has gone through a lot of processes, I can tell you that if I could ever share with you the first peer review draft that came to me, it was trashed like hell because they would just not understand the rationale and the logic that had existed on the decision making, how the word, just while mentioned about technology, how technology was perceived. To the Western world, it was very, very fascinating for them to see that how a developing country would be approaching the technology and trying to acquire technology and method and how it is applying those technology. This could not have come across from a logic if it were another Western author, another Scott Sagan or Berkovich or somebody writing that. It could have been a very different book. It became popular because, number one, who is he who's writing the book? And then how the voice became that. And I had to fight literally to keep the voice of the subcontinent. That's exactly the point that you guys were making. Because you can use the tool, but keep your voice. You cannot create a new theory out of nowhere because there's existing theory. Final word. With this technology available, you have now access to Chinese way of thinking. You have now access to Russian way of thinking, and so on and so forth. As young people, when we were growing up, we only knew the World War history because how the European history or the Western history or the victorious history was written. Did we know what the Germans thought about it? We did not know what was their side of the story. I was so much pushed back when I was a grad student. You're writing everything we know. What about the other side of the story? Now you have the access to know the other side of the story because technology enables you to do that. So that's all the word I can say from whatever little I've gathered, that there is not something that is you need to do. You are doing great, actually. As a matter of fact.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a surprise visit by Brigadier Feroz Hassan Khan, and we made best use of his short visit. I'm not going to conclude because enough has been said, and I don't want to test your patience as well. But don't listen what Rabia says, to everything what Rabia says. She was trying to incite rebellion, that you must go where we stop you. No, that was on the lighter part. I think that was the intent of this whole conference, to trigger your minds, to give you different flavors, that whatever the official narratives, because since these days, we're often gripped with these officially available narratives. So providing you different perspectives and just encouraging you to ask questions, think about these issues. Ali asked who would be the next Clausewitz. So we are looking for the next Clausewitz. So we can have that competition maybe amongst the youngsters who can come up with good theories amongst the youngsters that may or may not work, but at least it will start that discussion that the young minds, they need to think themselves as a future theory makers, going to that level that we can have indigenous theories from our youngsters. The third point about lighter side on Dr. Jaspal. I'm thankful you didn't mention that all the retired people become deans also. So it's thank you. I'm honored, sir. But he has a point. He has a point, but I have a disagreement also. If you see think tanks all over the world, the heads of think tanks, they are supposed to arrange the resources for their institutions where the researchers can work, develop, and come up with these studies. The heads of institutions are not supposed to produce papers. You see that model in DC, all the think tanks, former Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, some military journals. You see in India, several of the former military officers, they are heading those think tanks. You see in the United Kingdom, the same practice. But I agree to his point, where the funding sources pushes those think tanks to produce a certain narrative. That becomes a problem. The objectivity is missing. Their independence is curtailed. The researchers are not given enough opportunity to think openly and come out with objective and critical studies. So that's the deficiency. It's not the placement of the former military people or the diplomats. I think the problem is more about the culture, the think tanks culture that we have in Pakistan, especially that we want our youngsters to think the way we think. And that's one motto in our Air University. We don't push you to think in a certain way. We just train you to think objectively. So you have to come up with the conclusion yourself. So that's the difference. In the end, I'll just thank the speakers, all the speakers, the audience who were brave enough to have sat down in the last session all the way, and my faculty members, without which these events are not possible. The kind of work, hard work done by my faculty members, all of them as a team, and especially the brilliant volunteers, the students. I cannot forget mentioning FASS again and again, because we want to have more conferences. The whole purpose of this conference was just to, as I said, to start this debate. I'm sure I'm as confused as most of you are. Do we really need to indigenize South Asian epistemes or develop South Asian epistemes? We have no conclusive answer. And the purpose was also not to come up with some conclusions that we need to have or we don't need to have. It is a conversation that we have just started. And we hope other colleagues from other universities, think tanks, they will pick on this and we will have more such conversations in the future. We may not reach to any solid conclusion. I agree with most of the points that we are not a superpower. We are not knowledge makers. We are learning from what the major powers are doing. So as a relatively smaller nuclear weapon state, we still need to have some literature of our own where we are able to explain to the outsiders how we think strategically, how we deal with the rest of the international community, what is our conception of international relations. And this is only possible if we have a common definition of South Asia. As you would have listened since yesterday, many of our esteemed speakers, experienced scholars, they have been defining South Asia differently. So that's a big disconnect because we all have our own perspectives, lenses, and we want to define the region as it pleases us. But broadly speaking, a region can only be defined by the securitization processes of the neighboring countries. If there is security interdependence of a particular region, intra-region, then yes, you can have that political definition of South Asia. But as we have seen over a period of time, there have been several definitions, and we now have this new term, Southern Asia. Southern Asia means that you bring in China. So if you go in China, can you exclude United States? Because there is a global rivalry between the United States and China. So where you limit that, your line of inquiry, if you want to have that indigenous South Asian literature. So you have to first define what South Asia means. South Asia means mainly India, Pakistan, and the neighboring countries, which have some similarities, some security interdependence, but this is not a fixity. Over a period of time, regions do evolve politically, theoretically, depending upon how your security interests are interdependent. If your economic interdependency increases to other regions, to Central Asia, of course, for that purpose, you will have a different definition of a region. But from a security construct, what we see South Asia is essentially India, Pakistan, because these are two nuclear weapon states. Their behaviors, they affect other neighboring countries. And that is how we can come up with some conception of our region. And we don't have to be very ambitious by bringing other extra-regional powers into South Asian domains. I know many of my colleagues, they don't agree to this, but I have always been challenging this. If you want to confuse South Asian literature, you can come up with any definition, but you will not have any conclusions. So I'll not go further because there's a prayer time at 1:30. All those who want to offer Jummah prayers starts at 1:30. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you. Can we have a group photo of speakers and the faculty members, please? Just a request. My faculty members and also volunteers.